Please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment where you are watching in the world. Please submit your horror dating stories by our email in the description to us. You will also be entered into our $10 monthly prize. I'm a 31-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I have to rely a lot on the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age. We had a good convo, and then we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant not far for either of us to drive, so it was easy. She was very pretty in person, and we got along great. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned she had a roommate, whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much, and she said he's harmless, so I kinda let it go. We had a few more drinks and were there about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said we should go back to her place. And I wasn't going to argue it, she was hot lol. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking, and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin and tonics and was fine, and again she insisted. I thought it was weird, but I didn't care. We went to her house, and she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it, it was already open, which I found very odd because she said she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. It just didn't make sense, and before you could say anything she just kissed me and out her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, she was pretty hot and I quit caring about the cereal lol. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed, and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp. A scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window. I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did the door started banging. I went to open it because I was gonna fuck the dude up, or try to, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane, and she told me he does this and goes away. And I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" And she said yeah, and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all scared and kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I know this dude is a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar, and I was terrified. At this point I started calling her out for the door not being locked. The cereal, I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her, "If this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I will kill you both." I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily I never got my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month, but I honestly have no idea what the fuck I was into. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for. I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her in there again. When I just finished college, I was living in a 1-bedroom townhouse/split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at that time I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said he had a good job, nice teeth, don't judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date we said bye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled out the exit I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breath and decided, okay, screw it, I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed, and I started feeling dumb because, like, was that really him? Am I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Like, just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination. Or so I thought. I decided I was going to message him and just say, had a good time, good night. And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through to my phone of a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest. I started shaking. I didn't know what to say. And he texts me and says, I didn't know you lived across the street from me. I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him. There's a huge apartment complex kitty corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived, I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, just standing there outside like he was waiting for me. I opened the door and he asked if he could come in, and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him I was exhausted, and I'd rather just crash out as it had been a long day. The next morning I woke up to go to work, and my windshield had been smashed. My car was keyed, my back 2 tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees, and is like, oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee. So again I'm like freaked out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, don't get in that car. So I called my boss, told them the situation, and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time, BTW. When the police finally got there, this guy was acting really suspicious. He walked away and was like hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report. The police basically said, hope you have insurance, and we're on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cops' lights turn on, and the cops scream, freeze, put your hands in the air and get down on your knees. I look, and the cops got his gun drawn at this guy, and this dude's like on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with the cop after he got into the back, and he explained he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shook. It took me a couple days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done work. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment on another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move it to my new place because I was so scared this dude would follow them while moving. So that's my horror story of the first time I used plenty of fish. So he, 40 male, and I, 27 male, had been chatting for a few months. We moved in similar circles and had some FWB stuff happen in the past. He asked me on a date. He invited me to his company holiday party. He was a manager, a big wig, and I, his slightly younger arm candy. Well, that's how I pictured it in my head before the date. We arrive, and it's at a hotel ballroom. He tells me he booked us the presidential suite for later, and that he wanted us to have a good time and not drive home tipsy. We go in, and he proceeds to leave me at a table with random subordinates, his term, not mine. He left and talked to other managers and big wigs. I sat alone and barely talked to anyone. He did not introduce me or offer me a drink. When the main buffet-style meal was served, I waited for 20 minutes, but he only acknowledged me once to wave me on to get a plate. Well, fine with me. I got mashed potatoes, gravy, some type of beef, a nice salad, and those brown dinner rolls that are all airy. So I proceeded to eat alone. After 30 minutes, he shows up and eats and talks to me. I had gotten myself 3 glasses of wine by that point, making me more social at that point. I practically begged him to dance with me, and he adamantly refused. He said he didn't dance around his subordinates. The evening dwindled, and the party ended. I was 6 glasses of wine in. He decided it was time to retire to the hotel room. Drunk me was thinking at least there would be some good sex. He in wrong. He invited up 4 other male co-workers for some reason. I got up there and pretended to pass out on the bed. They just shit-talked and smoked weed. I eventually dozed off. I wake up maybe an hour later to them still talking, but he's flirting with his subordinates, telling one of them he could deep-throat them. It was not a fun convo, it felt awkward. Shortly after, they all left to go smoke cigarettes outside. I dozed again. I wake up around 4 a.m. to all the lights on, and him snoring beside me, pants around his ankles, naked. I get up, turn out some lights, and go to pee. In the bathroom, there's a massive diarrhea shit in the toilet. He did not wipe. I audibly gasped. I thought about leaving, but I was still tipsy and so tired. I went to get back in bed, and he rolled to his side shit streak across his side of the bed. My stupid, tired ass gets back in bed as close to the edge as I can with pillows between us, so I can sleep and make an exit. He woke me up around 10 a.m. saying he extended the hotel stay and wanted to get frisky right then and there. I fell out of the bed so fast, told him I hadn't expected to stay over so late, and I had morning plans I couldn't break. I then left. Worst date I've ever been on. I'm a young, 20s, gay man with a high sex drive. As such, I frequent Grindr, Scruff, etc. looking for opportunities to have sex. I have a thing for older men too. I don't really care how old as long as they don't look like my grandpa. I live in a big city, but even so, Grindr and Scruff can be pretty dry some days. A lot of the guys I'm into aren't attracted to me, cause I'm a lot younger. I'm also not white or muscly, so I don't get an abundance of attention on those apps in general. On those dry days, the wise thing to do would be to nut quietly by myself and go to sleep peacefully. But like any other 20-something man, sometimes my second head takes over and decides that sex tonight is a life necessity. I don't always meet someone in public first, but I'm pretty good at hooking up safe. I have a checklist of things that I will send one of my best friends every time I'm meeting someone. Screenshot of the online profile, all face pictures they gave me, a first name, their phone number if I have it, social media profiles if I have them where we're meeting. I'll text them regular updates when I'm on the way over, when I've made it over, and whether or not the guy is the guy in the pictures. If we ever move locations, I text them an exact address /app /room number immediately, or turn my location sharing on. Once it looks like the dirty is about to start, I'll let them know a time by which I'll text that I'm safe. And my friends are pretty awesome, so they look out for me. One thing to note, if a guy offers me a drink while I'm with them, I make sure it's in a sealed can or bottle, or they let me watch while they pour. Most people are actually very conscious and deliberate about this nowadays. It's nice. A couple months ago, I figured I'd start proactively casting a wider net for those nights that the apps are dry. I joined this site online specifically catered to the gay older/younger crowd, very early internet days /retro in terms of UI. Eventually I get a message from this guy. He sends me a kind of low residential picture of him in oversized glasses and a sweater/button-down combo. I read his profile and he's 71, enough for me to think that's old. And I can't quite tell if I'm attracted to him from the first photo. I message back asking for a second, and good sign. He sends one over without fuss. Again a bit low residential but without the glasses, and I think yeah okay maybe. His profile says something about how he's from the UK, and he's quite tall, so I figure British accent tall daddy? It'll be novel at least. Reading further on, he prattles on about how he likes meeting people who are strong-willed and breaking them down to be completely submissive to him. Sounds hot. We exchange phone numbers and text on WhatsApp a bit. He seems a bit arrogant. He starts telling me people often say he looks like a movie star. He looks way better in real life. Apparently he chooses poor pictures intentionally, so people get pleasantly surprised when they meet, and is telling me how he can tell that I'm smart by the way I text or something. Heard it all before, but I have a bit of a high tolerance for this brand of old man bullshit posturing at this point. He lets me know a date he'll be coming in and staying in a hotel downtown a month later. I figure I'll probably forget about him by then and never message him again. And then a month later rolls by, and it's another particularly dry night on the apps. I'm having a need sex now night, And I remember that guy I was talking to from that site. I hit him up on WhatsApp. Sure enough, he's in town and tells me where he's staying. I tell him I'll be there in an hour. You disease-free? He takes a while to respond. Eventually he says he is squeaky clean. We'll talk about it when you get here. I'm like, okay, sounds good. Text one of my friends the usual. I'm a little more nervous for this one, just cause he seems a little odd, and I kind of trust the apps a bit more weirdly. It's much easier to tell if someone is a legit person when they live in the same area as you. I figure it's a hotel. You can't be planning anything too awful for me. I show up to the hotel where he's standing in the lobby, and lo and behold, he looks exactly like his pictures, just much less happy and a bit more droopy. His shoulders hunch almost halfway up his neck. His torso is bent back at the waist a bit too much. He almost looks like he's imitating a confident cartoon character. But he is quite tall. He has a foot on me. I say hi. 2 words to describe the way he came across, preoccupied and calculating. His eyes seemed to shift everywhere constantly, and when they landed on mine, they were freakishly piercing. I don't remember if he said hi back, but the first thing he starts talking about is how that family over to the right is hiding some great unhappiness and will never be happy with themselves. I ask, why do you say that? He says it's because they are giving so much attention to the kid and aren't talking to each other. I look over. Looks like a regular sister, little brother, and mom tired from the day of vacationing, waiting for their dad to finish up sorting something out at reception. By the way, he has a very strong American accent. Bummer. We walk to the elevators. The second thing he says to me is that I breathe from my lungs when I sleep and don't let my breath drop into my belly. I have some classical training as a performer, so I have a decent understanding of basic functions like that. Decent enough to try to forward the conversation with the absent-minded reply, no. I breathe low. Eyes lock on mine. A brief pause. Only a subtle change in tone. You want to know how I know that? I look at the way your lower jaw rests now. It kind of has this unsightly protrusion from the bottom of the skull where it should be resting. That probably happens overnight, when you start breathing from your chest, which makes that fat tongue of yours press up against your bottom teeth and deforms it. No. I'm pretty sure I breathe low when I sleep. Okay, no need to get defensive. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I've never experienced this level of agitation from anyone within the first 2 minutes of meeting them. I have been in emotionally manipulative relationships before, so the feeling was familiar, and weirdly intense for a first meeting. My brain kind of goes on autopilot polite hookup mode, and I figure maybe it'll be okay once we stop talking. He continues posturing as we ride up the elevator. He loves psychology and predicting how humans act apparently. We get off on his floor and approach his room. I quickly fire off the suite number plus, he's a little odd, in a text to my friend. As he taps his keycard, he glances at me over his shoulder. You don't need to text someone my room number, you know. Okay, well I just did. I'm a very trustworthy person. You have to trust me. Okay, I just do that with everyone I meet. The room is fairly normal, nothing too weird. His stuff is piled in a corner a bit haphazardly. Bed is made, lights are all on, normal hotel room. I see an open wine bottle on the desk. A glass of Coke and a glass of white wine are pre-poured. I take off my jacket and sit on the edge of the bed. He sits on the desk chair, starts quizzing me. Do you do this a lot? You asked if I was disease-free. What are you expecting to happen here? Because I am a squeaky clean guy, I don't have sex with people unless I am in a relationship with them. The reason I ask is people who do this a lot tend to be quite dirty and slutty, and eventually it catches up to them. Listen, I can tell you're a smart guy. I can tell you're a strong-willed person. What I really like is when a strong-willed person like you becomes completely submissive to me. I like breaking them. At this point I realize he's not going to stop talking, and feel like it might be a good idea to leave before having my pants down around him. But I feel frozen, on the verge of tears even. He is making me feel small, like a child. I see him smile a little. He likes it. I am sufficiently creeped out. Look, I don't really think we're a match here, so I'm gonna go. Okay, you're feeling unsafe. No, I'm not. I just don't think we're on the same page. Let me know what I can do to make you feel safe. How about you have a drink? No thanks. Diet Coke or wine? I look at the pre-poured drinks on the desk. I get a gut feeling that I should not drink them. I stand up. No, I'm really fine, thank you. I quickly get my jacket on and jump into a polite, nice to meet you, take care, bye. On my way out the door, he give me wrong directions to get down to the subway from the hotel. Tells me smart people take that route, stupid people take the long way. I say thanks and leave. I text my friend, holy fuck I'm safe. And I take my normal ass subway route home. Thank you very much. I pledge to stop letting my dick think for me. Young Harrison Ford, let's not meet again. I wanted to clarify that this has not been my normal experience at all on dating apps. I've met up with at least 100 partners by this point, and this was the worst experience by far. This isn't representative of what it's like if you use dating apps carefully and use your head. That being said, I've been dealing with mental health stuff and have grown a lot as a person since this experience. I feel like I am a lot more confident now, and I would never get this deep into this kind of situation again. Young gays/trans/NBS, stay safe, y'all. Know your worth. Do not settle for bad dick. You are your own validation, not another person, no matter how horny you are. And yes, I really mean no matter how horny you are. All throughout high school there was a teacher who I had referred to as Creepy Creep. He deserved this name, and throughout this story I hope you can understand why. It all started in my freshman year. This teacher was an inclusion teacher, meaning he was in charge of taking care of the special needs kids that were allowed to be in the same classes as everyone else. Creepy Creep always seemed alone, and I always felt bad for him, so one day I complimented him on his haircut. I always regretted doing this because ever since, he was always in the same place as me. Later in my freshman year, I had broken my toe at a haunted house. After I came to school for the first time after I broke it, he stopped me in the hall to tell me I should avoid haunted houses. I just laughed it off, but later it hit me that it was really odd that he knew how I broke my toe because I hadn't actually told anyone at school. The next school year, he would always sit with me at my lunch table until my friends showed up. That same year he was running up the stairs and accidentally tripped, which I just happened to see. He seemed fine until he noticed I was one of the students who saw. He started crying, and later that day, he sat with me at lunch apologizing that he never wanted to embarrass himself like that in front of me. My junior year, he gave me this huge hug on the first day telling me how much he missed me over the summer. This year he would always sit with me at lunch even after my friends would show up. He said my friends weren't true friends if they had a problem with us sitting together. One day at lunch, I was talking about how I was leaving early for a dentist appointment. He asked what time I was leaving, and I said right after lunch. Then a few minutes later he left, which I was honestly so grateful for. Once I got to my car to leave, it wouldn't start. Creepy Creep just happened to be out there though, and offered to give me a ride home. I told him it was fine because my stepdad was on his way to get me, and anyways he had to get back to school. Creepy Creep told me it wouldn't take any time for him to take me home since my house was just down the road. That's when I got really freaked out because he knew where I lived. Luckily my stepdad showed up just in time. Creepy Creep actually introduced himself to my stepdad, saying it was nice to finally meet the man who raised such a beautiful girl. My senior year I ended up going to a different school, and I got a new job as a delivery driver. About a week into the job there was a special note on the bottom of the delivery saying, "Bring to back door, and you can just walk in," which wasn't too odd to me because sometimes that's a common note on delivery for elderly people who can't make it to the door. So I made it to the delivery and went inside, but it was no other than Creepy Creep. When I walked in he went in for a kiss telling me how much he missed me. I was so terrified because not only was this my creepy stalking teacher, but he had also just kissed me. He told me how upset he was not to hear from me on our 2-year anniversary, but he said he understood because it's hard to keep in touch after being at different schools. He asked me to quit my job and just stay with him for the rest of the day, so we could celebrate our anniversary the proper way. Luckily my boss called yelling at me for taking so long on my delivery. So I told Creepy Creep that I had to go quit my job in person, so I wouldn't get in trouble for keeping the money from his delivery. Then I would come right back. He was so happy and said he was so excited to see me putting more effort into our relationship. So I quit my job and then went straight home and told my parents everything. I also haven't heard from Creepy Creep ever again. I answered some questions about details on part 1, which was the story you just read, which I'll repeat here to clear some stuff up. Part 1 happened in 2015, when I was a junior in high school, and I'm a junior in college now. I was 15 during this first homecoming debacle, because I'm young for my grade. Everyone else involved was 16 or 17 at the time. My parents, after all this played out, had very different reactions. My mother apologized for not believing me in the first place, and pressuring me to lower my standards. My relationship with her has become a success story in the past 4 years, and this experience jump-started its evolution. On the other hand, my father has rewritten the narrative entirely and insists he never once advocated I go to homecoming with my date. He says he was always wary of this kid, and he also did never ask if I was gay. I'm not. I'm bi actually, but I didn't realize it until senior year of high school. I didn't go to the guidance counselor, yet, because she was known to be bad at her job, as you'll see in this continuation. She victim-blamed a lot, and she would usually bring up religion to solve students' problems, regardless of our school being public and non-religious. She was fired after I graduated in 2017. My high school and home district in general was an administrative nightmare. I've heard from younger friends that, after a massive staff turnover, things are starting to look up, but none of it improved during my time there. My story was perfectly in character for the level of ignorance my school expressed towards unhealthy activity. My date didn't, and doesn't, use social media, at least not to my knowledge. I found an abandoned Twitter account that looked like it might belong to him, but it was last active in 2016. I have no contact with him at all anymore, which I guess is a happy ending. A few people have implied I'm making all of this up. They're not the first, and they probably won't be the last, to say so. Even I know this shit's wild, and that's why I didn't say a word about it for years. I don't feel the need to prove my honesty to random strangers on the internet. If there's anything I learned from this nightmare, it's that people will only believe what they want to believe. The truth is that I had a weird-as-all-hell experience, and it's affected my life in a lot of ways. Believe it or don't, I still have to deal with its repercussions on a daily basis. This post is less of an update, since all of this happened years ago, than it is a continuation. Long story short, my ex-date didn't get the message after homecoming junior year, and he ended up pulling some seriously weird shit even until after we graduated. None of it was as epic as junior homecoming, but it definitely cast a shadow over the latter half of my high school experience. From here on out, due to his activity for the next 2 years, I'll be referring to him as my stalker. For the months after homecoming, things started to settle down again. I didn't have any classes with my stalker, and the only person I still had to deal with was the junior cheer captain. She would go out of her way to be nice to me, inviting me to parties and buying me coffee and giving me rides to games, basically bribing me to keep quiet about what a manipulative person she was. My stalker reappeared on Valentine's Day, 2016. I was still a junior, but I had almost forgotten that homecoming even happened when, halfway through my day, he cornered me in the hallway and gave me a rose out of his teeth. I hoped that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my classmates' appetite for drama. During 7th period theater, we were in the library computer lab. After the rose thing, my crush from fall semester, who had since come out as gay, warned us that my stalker was carrying around a present for me in his backpack. I thanked him for the heads up and told my best friend, Gay Revolution Lesbian. She and I were sitting together on the inside of a row when the bell rang. We stood up to leave, but the girl on the other side of me turned to face us, blocking us off from the exit. She was a close friend of the junior cheer captain's. She asked me what I was doing after school, and I knew that she must be trying to herd me towards my stalker, so I could collect my presents. I leveled with her and said I knew my stalker was waiting for me somewhere, and I told her straight up that I wasn't going to play nice with him anymore. She turned on the same old guilt trip as everyone else, telling me how much he cared about me and how hard he worked on these presents, but I refused to go. I knew I needed to get out of the school as soon as possible, before she just told my stalker to come meet me at the library instead of the theater hall. To get her out of my way, I said I'd go meet him after I went to the bathroom, and she moved out of the walkway. My best friend and I hid out in the bathroom farthest from the theater hall. I knew he wouldn't leave until he'd delivered his gifts, and we had rehearsal that day, so I knew I'd have to go down there sooner or later. My best friend suggested she go down and retrieve the presents for me, so he'd leave before I had to go to rehearsal. 2 more of my friends happened upon our bathroom crisis, and they decided to link up with my best friend on her mission. I waited in the bathroom while they went to intercept the gifts. 20 minutes later, they returned. Among the gifts were 3 boxes of my favorite candy, which I didn't really like anymore, thanks to this whole mess, an expensive Doctor Who jewelry box, and a full bouquet of roses again. They told me, laughing uncomfortably, that there had been a whole group of people waiting for me to walk into the theater hall. My stalker wasn't too happy to hand over the presents, but my best friend made it clear I wouldn't be coming to get them, so he could hand them over to my friends or never deliver them at all. After about 10 minutes, the group waiting for me dissipated, and my stalker gave away the gifts. I was so creeped out that I didn't keep any of them, not even the jewelry box, which was TARDIS-shaped and actually kind of cool. For my birthday a few weeks later, I got out of school after fourth period and went to a theme park with my cousin. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving or where I was going. My best friend told me my stalker had waited outside the theater hall for me with a letter and a rose in hand until the school kicked everyone out who wasn't in theater. I was assistant director and light crew for one-act play that spring. An acquaintance of mine who didn't keep up with gossip was in charge of making the program, and she mentioned how cute my boyfriend was for taking out an ad in the program for me. I was sufficiently freaked out, told her I didn't have a boyfriend, and asked to see the ad he'd paid for. It was a picture of my stalker and I from junior homecoming, along with a note that said something like, "Good luck, Saucy, I love you." I begged my friend not to put it in the program, and she didn't, seeing my obvious discomfort. She refunded him his money and made some excuse about a local business buying more ad space. He tried the same trick for the last show of the year, which I was actually in. He showed up to opening night and got kicked out for filming. The theater department has now instituted a widespread rule of checking with the person an ad is targeted at before printing it, which is more than school administration ever cared to do. During a cleanup day for theater the summer before senior year, a guy from a different school showed up to help. He had been talking to me over social media for a few weeks, and I knew I was his next target. He'd made a game out of going on a date with every girl in our department. Sure enough, he asked me out while I cleaned up the prop closet, and I agreed. He was decent looking, and he wasn't mentally unstable, even if he was a fuckboy. I also knew that, if I played my cards right, I could turn this to my advantage. He was using me, so I just made sure I got something out of it, too. We went on our date, it was okay, no weird advances or anything, and he bought me dinner. On the way home, I directed the conversation towards homecoming. He caught my drift and asked me right there, no muss, no fuss. I said yes. Senior year started. My new date was all the way over at his school on the other side of town. My stalker was in 2 of my classes, 4th period biology and 6th period English, and had the same lunch as me. I was hyper aware of him staring at me every day, but didn't want to make a big deal about it. I knew he wanted my attention, and I refused to give it to him. Instead, I went about my life as usual. I made friends with the teachers who were lunch hall monitors, so I could leave the cafeteria, effectively avoiding my stalker. I ate lunch in the theater hall with my best friend every day. I asked my biology and English teachers not to make me sit by him or work in groups with him, and they agreed, if somewhat reluctantly. They, like pretty much everyone else, thought I was a dramatic cheerleader making up stories. I was a senior, and I really didn't want to deal with the bullshit of a crazy stalker anymore. Not that I ever wanted to in the first place. Homecoming was even earlier this year than last year. In English class, my stalker sat near 2 theater girls who usually walked to 7th period theater with me, and he turned around to ask them for ideas on how to ask me to homecoming. They were in the camp of classmates who were amused by my stalker's antics, so they wanted to rile him up and watch the fireworks. They also knew about the fuckboy I was talking to, because theater kids are the worst gossips ever, and they gleefully told my stalker that I already had a date. He proceeded to attempt to bite his finger off in class, which went about as well as you might think. Obviously, he didn't succeed, but he did draw blood, and he terrified my 2 theater friends, who had incited his instability. He stared at me the whole time, and I sat on the other side of the room and ignored him. I didn't care what he did. I refused to give him my attention, and I wouldn't be intimidated by him anymore. After class, my 2 friends came up to me and told me the details of what had just happened. Together, the 3 of us approached the English teacher. She believed me fully this time. He was moved into a different English class by the next week. Side note, bless this teacher. She was the first adult I encountered who took action to protect me, and she continued to check in with me about the situation throughout the rest of senior year. 6th period became nothing less than a sanctuary for me, because for once somebody believed me, and they were listening. I didn't have to worry about him after 4th period, because I skipped lunch every day. I was getting confident about my escape maneuvers. Edit. Forgot to mention the 3rd and weirdest self-harm incident. After getting kicked out of English class, he desperately wanted my attention, so he got a pass out of his class one day and found mine. He walked to the trash can outside the door to my class, and I watched in horror and disgust as he pulled out a tooth and held his face over the trash can, spitting out blood. I know I said I wasn't giving him attention anymore, but the kid just ripped out a body part. I feel like I'm allowed to be terrified. Then my usual hall monitor was gone, and I got stuck in the cafeteria. I had been out of lunch for so long that I had forgotten my stalker was in the same one until I accidentally made eye contact with him, staring at me from across the room like some kind of grudge ghost. The second I saw him, he started speed walking across the room to my table. I ignored him, hoping he was just trying to psych me out, but it didn't work. He sat down in the seat next to mine. I was freaking out. I looked at the girl on the other side of me and begged her to get him out of here. She simply laughed at me. A year before, I would have kept quiet and dealt with my discomfort for fear of people hating me. But I was a year older and already contracting senioritis, so I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and stomped out of the lunchroom. The hall monitor stopped me, asking where I was going and if I had a pass. I said I was going to talk to the crisis counselor, and he let me go, probably because he didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I walked directly to the counselor's office, signed in, and found myself sitting in her office a few minutes later. I told her the whole story from the beginning. I had been to her office once before, and she'd shooed me away after saying I was being too dramatic. This time, she didn't. Instead, she spent the greater half of the hour I was there asking why I hadn't come to her when all this started. When I finally got her to address the actual problem, her first question reaffirmed my fears. She asked me, after I told her about the self-harm and threats and general creepery, what about him made me so opposed to dating him? I thought I was going to scream. I had a gut feeling that the truth wouldn't get me anywhere, and I needed action. I didn't care how I got it done, but I needed him out of my life and definitely out of my classes. So, knowing full well her attachment to Jesus, I pulled the saving myself for Jesus card. I put all those Sundays being forced to go to church to good use, and it worked. She stopped asking me why I'd waited, why not just date him, and asked what would make me feel safer. I told her to get him out of my schedule, and she said she'd look into my options. Within a few days, I was called back to her office. She had gotten him placed in another lunch period, but biology was only offered fourth period, and both of us needed it to graduate. I still considered this a victory. I only had to see him for 50 minutes every day. She told me to come talk to her whenever I needed someone to lean on. She would make sure my teachers understood. Fun fact, junior year, my best friend was sexually assaulted by an adult man. When she left class mid-panic attack to go see this crisis counselor, she was told to pull herself together and get back to class before she missed anything important. My stalker found new methods of seeing me. My best friends didn't make the cast of Winter Musical, but I did. I didn't realize that I had been isolated until my stalker joined crew and regularly tried to intimidate me. He would drill holes in set pieces that didn't need work because I was sitting near them and he wanted to watch me flinch. He would steal the props I used and hide them in the shop, so I had to be near him to retrieve them. My new crush and I were co-dance captains, and she convinced her friend the set head to keep my stalker off stage at all times. After musical ended in spring, my new crush told me she'd heard my stalker was getting angry about me, playing hard to get. I was hanging out in the theater hall with a few crew kids, getting ready for one-act play, when one of them pointed at me shocked and went, "You're saucy?" He told me he'd seen pictures of my backyard. I was confused and weirded out, so he explained that my stalker had shown him pictures of my backyard and porch. I asked to see them, and he said he didn't have the pictures, he'd just been shown them by my stalker. I didn't really believe him, and he could tell, so he said, "You have a big bay window in your living room, a bunch of bikes on your back porch, and a big-ass rose bush." It was an accurate description. I don't know for sure how to explain that, but I've theorized that my stalker had, at some point, been in my backyard before we adopted our purebred Doberman. The Doga had freaked out in the middle of the night a few times, but we brushed it off. Now, I wasn't so sure. My bedroom was in the front of the house, so I tried to reassure myself by thinking he hadn't seen me changing or anything super scary, but it didn't really help. My best friend was disowned by her mother and stepdad, and within a weekend she was shipped off to live with her biological father. I told myself I could survive the next 4 months and graduate, and then I'd never see my stalker again. I persuaded my parents, as prom and graduation approached, that I only wanted one present, my best friend. They paid for her plane ticket both ways and flew her home to be my date to prom. I kept her a secret so I could surprise our other friends when she showed up at prom to dance with us. My stalker only briefly entertained the thought of asking me to prom, which I later discovered was the now senior cheer captain's doing. I guess she'd finally started to realize the full effect of her actions, because she'd told him he needed to leave me alone. I don't know what else she said, but he went eerily silent in the weeks leading up to prom. He still came to the last play of the year, but he didn't film me this time. He waited for me outside the auditorium afterwards, but I was with other people on our way to cast dinner, and he didn't try anything. At prom, my friends were elated when they saw my best friend had returned. We danced and talked shit and had a great time together. It was honestly one of the best moments of my life when they walked in and saw her. Of course, my stalker tried one last time to change my mind. My friends and I were sitting at one of the tables together, laughing and catching up, and I saw my best friend's expression turn into a glare when someone walked up behind me. I turned around to see my stalker, waiting behind my chair. I stood up, I was taller than him in my heels, and said as calmly as possible that he wasn't welcome here. I was also 17 and pissed off and feeling unstoppable, so I tacked on, "If you ever speak to me again, I'll rip your dick off." It was the last thing I ever said to him. My best friend flew away again, we all graduated, and everyone went our separate ways for college. I saw my stalker again at the first homecoming after I graduated high school, but he didn't talk to me. He just stared at me the whole game. Later, he showed up to my sister's fall play at our alma mater, and he asked a cast member where she was and if I was there. Lucky me, the cast member was one of my littles, and he told my stalker he needed to leave immediately. I guess this story has a happy ending. I got away in one piece, with no foreseeable appearance of my stalker in my future. To my dad, I do in fact like boys. I just like girls too. But for the sake of the subreddit and my happiness, homecoming date from hell, worst set crew member ever, and bringer of teeth roses and junior mints, let's not meet again. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl, but when I was 15, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kind of knew who we were because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with the students a lot. I made a lot of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffered at their hands. I even developed a crush on one of them, a crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is a big deal where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I'd heard rumors he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I would be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I'd hardly spoken to asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot recording the whole surprise. But most importantly, the cool kids I'd recently befriended were standing right there behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he wasn't popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kind of creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She'd definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't really know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile and rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later, in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the ordeal, I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got strong, creepy vibes from the guy. That didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high, and my father demanded to know, not for the first time, if I was secretly a lesbian. I had never had a boyfriend or shown much interest in dating. To make his case stronger, I'd just become best friends with the only openly gay girl our school had ever seen. Long story short, I knew that if I shut down my date, I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend-zone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night and explained that I only saw us as friends, but would still be happy to go to homecoming with him. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we'd reached a deal until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her we're just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused and told me my date was telling anyone who could listen that I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement and suggested it was just a rumor. I reminded him that we were just friends, and I had zero romantic interest in him. He said he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet and conspiratorial, but I was still annoyed that she'd led me to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend-zone my date. She said that she'd spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him, and she knew he was kind of creepy from afar, but he was sweet and caring underneath all that. I said, if he was such a catch, she should date him. Annoyed, she dropped the sweet act. She told me that I had to date him, because he liked me so much, and he'd gone to so much trouble to ask me to homecoming. I had to give him a chance, because he'd gone out on a limb for me. I told her she was wrong, and I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do, and I owed him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway and give me a rose he held in his teeth. He usually did so between my 6th and 7th periods, when my path through the hall crossed his. I was deeply uncomfortable with this and told him so, but he wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him, but the junior cheer captain and her posse made a point of tracking me down so he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He was still telling everyone I was his girlfriend. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, let this happen. For weeks afterwards, she would ask me about my date every day. When he came in, I told him to get out and leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold, hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was part of the popular group, joined the junior cheer captain in pressuring me into returning my date's feelings. At every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would wave a flag in the student section so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back to the school, just to hug me and tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do other than let this happen. I had only recently ascended to a position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids, who were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all blow over. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual, in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him, during their afternoons together, that I was into him. He'd come to her for help announcing his crush on me, and she'd gone a step further and convinced him I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She'd lied to him for weeks prior to the homecoming proposal, and when I told her that was wrong, she didn't care. She told me I should be grateful, because everybody was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend, the lesbian who was starting a gay revolution, and I, inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, he told everyone that he'd just turned me straight again. EW. 3 weeks after he asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without my dress, I ended up only attending the dance for half an hour. My date awkwardly stood on the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him when, right at the end, the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest we slow dance at the next opportunity. Thank God I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggesting he play Footloose. My date walked me out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up. While we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stop making a fuss and date him, he asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of people, like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends, and I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was too busy. That was actually true. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater and cheer, and worked part-time. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the alma mater, kind of a romantic thing at my school. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in the stands. Monday, my date stood on a chair in his second period class and announced that everyone should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later when someone called me a bitch, again, for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided not to go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad I didn't. Later, I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into his arm with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by half a dozen people, most of them demanding why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow no administration noticed or cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a broken-hearted victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided to tough it out for 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. While she'd initially been insistent that I date the creepy guy, she'd apparently changed her mind after the lunch incident earlier. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails. He had started out saying that he wanted to kill himself because I wouldn't love him. This had escalated to saying he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he'd started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house, and he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that, after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall with nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She'd made this mess, and I would make sure she had to clean it up. She said she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was way beyond her control now. For the first and only time, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there and waiting for me to walk by alone horrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in, cackling, and proclaimed that my date was coming down here after school to kill my crush. They thought this was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama, pun fully intended. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide out elsewhere in the theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date had turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom where we couldn't see him when we opened the door. He told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We don't know if he actually had a knife or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels that he was bleeding through. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes, until the administrators began walking through to make sure no one was in the school who shouldn't be. My date wasn't in theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night, I texted him that not only would I never date him, but could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a suicide hotline and told him to get help. Finally, I told him that he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I don't think he learned the meaning of the word after all, because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day, the next year at homecoming, senior year Valentine's Day, and prom. But those are other stories. I've since graduated and gone off to college hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents gave him. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not gay. My crush, on the other hand, came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of high school. I'm working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way, but he got in my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me. Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first, and only, homecoming game after graduating, but this time I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some weird stuff with me. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference the whole ordeal as, "That time you wouldn't date that poor shy kid." I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. Dude's been asking me out for the better part of the year. I finally say, "Yeah, sure, let's go somewhere." So he suggested this Mexican restaurant. I say okay, and we go to this little taco shop in a town over. I drove myself. BC, you got me fucked up. If I want to go, I'm gonna go. We pull up around the same time, get inside and sit down. We get our chips/salsa, and I'm munching on them like hardcore. You'd think I never ate with how much I was downing them. He might have felt weird, but it because I didn't care. I had chips and salsa. He then looks at the menu and keeps frantically looking through it. I finally said, "What you want to get?" He then proceeds to tell me he hates Mexican food. We are in an area covered in Mexican restaurants, mind you. He then orders a grilled cheese off the menu, and then deadass turns to me and says women should be subservient to men. I stop midship and stare. Lead paint type stare. He continues on and on about how he saw how strong-willed I was, and he wanted to be the one to break me. I grab my bag, dip TF out of there. He spam calls me and tells me WTF I should pay for his food, and he expected something out of me. I blocked his number and went about my merry way. A few days later, I go to work and HES there. He's pretending to not know me and acts like a customer. I ignore him and get in trouble. Told management about the situation with him, and my bomb-ass manager comes out and handles him. The dude asks for me and manager says I'm busy. He says he'll wait, so right in front of the dude my manager calls me over and tells me to go take my lunch. I am giggling at this point, so I go in the back and just idle for about 15 minutes before I hear yelling. He was screaming at my boss to go get a manager. My boss literally goes in the back for 2 seconds, walks back out and holds his hand for a handshake and says, "Hi." And the manager here, literally comedy gold, and him trying hard to not die from laughing. He ended up finally leaving. He left a bunch of reviews about me and the boss. And whatever. He spam-missed me a lot. He got friends' accounts to message me, but he eventually stopped. I was like fresh 18. Been a while to be honest. Hope he's less crazy. I had an old college friend come to visit me and stay for a weekend. Knew her in college. She was amazingly intelligent and fascinating, but we were both spoken for at the time. Years later I got Facebook, and she was one of the first people to find me. Both of us were single. She asked if I wanted to date her. I said hell yes. I was thrilled at the prospect. The short version. The weekend was spent listening to her narcissistic bullshit. She told me jokes that are as old as the internet, reworded to sound like personal life anecdotes. She told me all this insane edgelord shit she used to or still does, like taunting police, back in 2009, or sneaking Cuban products back to America when the embargo was still in place. She tried to start a fight with a bouncer when we went to a bar, and she forgot her ID back at my house, a block away. We visited some of my best friends, and the moment we parted she talked shit about them nonstop. My brother came by since I texted him I was out and hung out. She talked to him for quite a while. He left, then she spent the rest of the night talking about how attractive he was. At this point I was just counting the hours until she left. I was no longer interested in her. She finally left, and I get a text that night. "You failed all my tests. You laughed at my jokes that weren't really jokes, you didn't defend me against the bouncer, and you aren't interested in my passion, fighting bouncers and cops. And you sat there and took it while I talked about your brother. Also, I don't find you physically attractive." I didn't reply. I just cut my losses and fell asleep. Several months later, at 4 a.m., I get another text from her. Same text as I just wrote, only this was out of nowhere, and the injury following insult. I gave her absolute hell for it, and blocked her on Facebook. She then made duplicate Facebook accounts, and threatened me on those too. She gave up eventually, but I dodged a fucking bullet. I had been chatting to this guy in my English lit tutorial for a few weeks, and kind of had a crush on him. Eventually asked him if he'd like to grab dinner with me, and he said yes. We'd also been messaging each other on and off throughout the semester, so I was super excited. First of all, he insisted on making the reservations for our date. Fine, whatever. He ended up picking a local Italian restaurant, and we made plans to meet there at 7 p.m. I showed up before him, and told the waitress at the door that I had a reservation for 2, under date's name, at 7 p.m. The lady was super confused, and said she didn't have any reservations under that name. I tried just his first name, then perhaps my name, in case he'd booked a table under my name for some reason. There was no reservation. Finally, I asked if the restaurant had a table for 2 available, and luckily they did, but at the bar. Figured that was better than nothing, and went with that. Then he showed up 15 minutes late, made a huge deal about how he was sure he'd made a reservation, came this close to asking for a manager, then acquiesced and sat down beside me at the bar. Next up, we ordered our starters and got to talking. This is also when I realized that he loses the ability to modulate his voice when he's drunk. As in, he'll shout certain words and say others super softly. We were talking about a TV show we both liked, Poldark, and we discussed Ross cheating on Demelza. It was at this point that he said, "I was so mad at Ross for cheating. Like, hello, you're married, keep it in your pants." This pretty much brought the restaurant to a standstill. Heads turned our way, everyone was gaping at us. I wanted to die. I smiled awkwardly and whispered that he should keep it down, so we didn't disturb others. When it was time to order our mains, he made this big show of letting me order anything I wanted on the menu. Like, I can totally afford whatever you want. Great! I ordered a pumpkin salad and a glass of wine, and he kept urging me to order something more expensive, in a really cringy way. "You're a lady, you shouldn't be picking up the tab, I'll pay for whatever you want." Then our mains arrived, and I learned that the guy cannot use cutlery. Like, he was genuinely having trouble getting spaghetti onto his fork, and kept dribbling sauce onto his chin/shirt. He couldn't handle a knife and fork. And it wasn't just a one-off case of oops, Butterfingers, dropped my fork. It was sustained, prolonged. I have no idea how these foreign objects work. I'm quite sure a robot would have been able to handle cutlery with more grace. So that got super distracting super quick. Try holding a conversation with a guy who's dribbling sauce onto his clothes and randomly shrieking at you. It's not conducive to romance. Then came time to order coffee/dessert, and he made this big show about how well he knows me by trying to guess whether I'd order coffee or tea. He guessed that I prefer coffee, I prefer tea, and ordered a double espresso for me, which I'm not entirely fond of. I wanted to order a panna cotta for myself, and he wanted tiramisu. He said sharing a dessert would be more romantic, and only ordered the tiramisu. Like, great. Thanks for ordering for me. Ugh. When the dessert arrived, he kept suggestively licking his spoon, then offering me a bite off of it. May I remind you that this man couldn't fathom the deep complexities of knives and forks? Spoons were also a mystery for him. It was like watching a dog lap peanut butter off the wall. I told him I was full from dinner, declined his repeated offers of dessert, took a few gulps of my espresso, and just prayed that the date would end soon. Once we'd left the restaurant, he offered to drive me home. I told him I'd driven to the restaurant and that I could drive myself home. Then he remembered something I'd said from an earlier tutorial. In the good old days, back when I'd thought he was cute. He remembered that I still live with my parents. So then he got excited because he wanted to meet my parents. After the first date. Because according to him, it had gone so well, I must be dying to show off my new date. Oh, I was dying, all right. I dodged his attempt at a kiss. He ended up kissing my ear. Told him I wasn't ready to see someone, and speed walked back to my car. I avoided him for the rest of the semester, which he spent glaring at me. Wonderful. In college, I had a couple classes with this guy who was a little out there, but otherwise seemed nice. We'd gotten lunch a bunch of times as friends, so when he asked me out on a dinner date, I figured it wouldn't be awkward. Initially, I didn't want to go on this particular day because I had a 10-page paper due that week and needed to finish it that night, but he was insistent that 10 pages wasn't that long, and the date would be quick. So that afternoon I text him that I'm near where his car is parked, working on my paper in a cafe. He tells me that he's actually parked across town, so I get on a bus and meet him outside the lecture hall he was in. I expect us to go to his car, but he's like, "Oh, no, I was wrong, I parked in neighborhood I just left." At that point I was annoyed, but willing to let it go. We take the bus back to his car, but he insists that we have to take this particular bus that makes more stops as opposed to the express bus, because he isn't parked in his usual on-campus lot. Of course it's rush hour, so it takes 40 minutes to go maybe 2 miles. He makes us get off the bus at an unusual stop off campus because he insists that it's closer to his car, but as we're walking I realize that his car is in his usual campus lot, and we could have saved ourselves 20 minutes by staying on the bus. I was like, what the fuck? Why did you lie? His face goes totally blank, like devoid of all emotions in a way I'd never seen on him. He says he lied to spend more time with me, because he knew I had to work on my paper immediately after we got back from dinner. I tell him that I really can't afford to waste time today, and that's why I suggested we schedule for something next week. He replies that he didn't think I would notice. We drive to dinner, but at this point I've kind of shut down. He told me this place was right down the road, but it's actually an hour away upstate. We get there and it's packed, so we wait by the bar. He offers to buy me a drink to make up for the stress. I say no, then cave in when he keeps offering, and order a beer. He then vanishes for 30 minutes, so I have to sit alone in our booth and pay for said drink that I wouldn't have ordered if he didn't offer. He then reappears and we make small talk. He tells me how he has an essay due tomorrow that's 1,000 words, 5 pages, and complains that he's never had to write an essay before and how difficult he's finding it. At this point, I have a small stroke because this guy had the nerve to tell me that my 10 PG evolutionary genetics pager wasn't that bad, when he's apparently taken nothing but electives in the 3 years he's been enrolled. The service was so slow, and I was so annoyed that I took out my laptop and started working on my essay. He went on talking like nothing was wrong until our food arrived. He drives me back, and at this point it's midnight. I was hoping to be home by 7 p.m. I tell him to drop me off by the library, but he insists on walking me to my apartment, despite me telling him repeatedly that I'm going to the computer lab. He parks near my building instead and starts walking with me, stopping at the door like I'm going to let him into my building. I walk right past him, and when he asks where I'm going I tell him computer lab. When we reach the lab I turn to him and say, "Have a nice night," and he leans in to kiss me. I lean back and say, "Sorry, I'm not interested." He then fully leans over me and asks what he did wrong. Not angry or threatening, but he kept blocking me when I tried to walk away. Then finally, the door to the lab opens and my friend, also one of my genetics classmates, comes wandering out and casually stands there right next to us, just sort of loitering like, "Hey, what's up?" I finally step around my date, who's less bold now that there's a witness, and go inside. My friend then sat there next to me for the rest of the night as we worked on our papers and made fun of me. This was several years ago, before everyone had cell phones, and I didn't have one at the time. It would have made things tremendously easier. So this chick hits me up off a personal ad, and we seem to hit it off. She's a little older than I am, and the picture makes her look a little bigger than I normally go for. But whatever, she seems cool. It's kind of weird she wants to pick me up rather than meeting somewhere, but whatever, things happen. I should have stopped everything when a dingy old Honda Civic rolls up, and someone who's not a little older, but a lot older and a lot heavier than I expected gets out. But I don't, because I was young and stupid and don't want to offend her by doing the 180 back into my house when it's abundantly obvious that picture was really out of date. So I get into the car, which is full of trash, and we set out. She tells me she needs to swing by her place, and I say sure, whatever. Her place is in the projects, and I don't mean the kind of rundown but still nice part of town, I mean the actual housing projects. She invites me inside, and I figure it's better than sitting in the car waiting to get shot and robbed. So I join her inside, where I meet her boyfriend and kid, neither of whom she'd thought to mention before. Her boyfriend is remarkably laid back about me wandering in, apparently on a date with his girlfriend, and promptly offers me some of his drugs. Now I'm not against doing drugs, but I only do them when they come from sources I trust, and when I'm around people I trust. So I decline, mainly because even with my experience, I can't identify the mounds of colorful pills and other paraphernalia he's selecting from. Also for obvious reasons. Her kid, meanwhile, is toddling around oblivious while the girl does whatever it is she's doing in the bathroom. Dude drops his pills and eats what looks like blotter acid, and we wind up watching The Simpsons like some weird extended family. It turns out that he didn't know exactly what he'd combined either, and he starts having a freak out, and since she's in the bathroom and the toddler is a toddler, guess who's stuck talking him down? especially because he's talking about God talking to him, and God's telling him things that aren't exactly making me any more comfortable in this incredibly awkward situation. But I've done this before. I have a lot of hedonist friends, and staying calm and talking someone through a surprisingly hallucinogenic experience is something I'm comfortable with. At least compared to exiting stage right into the heart of the ghetto as it's getting dark, or getting murdered if his trip takes a bad turn. She comes out sometime later to find him naked on the floor. His clothes had gotten too hot, and were also gradually getting smaller and going to kill him. You see, with his eyes shut, while I calmly try to talk him through what were apparently some weapons-grade hallucinogenics, among other things. She doesn't seem surprised by this at all, as if the whole evening is perfectly normal, and it's common to find one's date walking one's boyfriend through a bad trip, and asks me if I'm ready to go. I ask if we should be concerned about leaving the guy there when he's got several hours to go and a kid around, but she shrugs and assures me everything will be fine, so we head to the car. She starts driving, and we're discussing where to go for dinner. I know a really nice restaurant, which she says is too fancy. I know a kind of nice restaurant, but she doesn't like their food. I know a quirky hole in the wall that's kinda gross but has fantastic food, but she doesn't want to go that way. She suggests Taco Bell. I make a noise that's somewhere between a okay and really, which she takes as agreement, and we go to Taco Bell. At this point, I'm just happy to not be in the projects, and so I make the best of it, ordering a couple tacos, and, being the gentleman, I pay when she orders what seems to be half the menu. My chance comes when she disappears into the bathroom. Without even thinking about it, I'm gone. I'm out the door and halfway down the block before I even realize what I'm doing. And I see in the distance, back at the Taco Bell, her burst out the door and look around, then start shouting for me to come back. And then I see her get in the car. But she's not going home. Oh no, she's starting to look for me. This particular Taco Bell was on a main drag that backed up to kind of a residential neighborhood, so I wind up hiding behind hedges and shrubs as she patrols the streets looking for me. This goes on for 2 or 3 hours, with me skulking in the bushes as she circles the block and drives up and down the streets. I've dodged cops that were less determined. I managed to work my way back to my building, only to find her waiting in her car out front, but she didn't know about the back entrance, so I snuck in that way and left all my lights off, and locked and barricaded the door because, Jesus. The sight of someone strange lurking in the parking lot at that late hour prompts one of the neighbors to call the cops. She refuses to leave. She calls the cops a number of interesting profanities, judging by the screaming I hear from the parking lot, especially when they decided to take her in for disturbing the peace. And she took a swing at one of them, adding a resisting arrest charge to her collection. The next, and only, time I see her is in the newspaper the next day in the police blotter. I will try to keep this short as possible. I am taking serious, as true and not as serious topic as this is obviously humorous, the black bean soup incident. I went to a small engineering college, and there were like 9 girls in my program, one of which was extremely hot and very cool. I was neither, but can be funny, and I use that to my advantage. Over the course of 6 months, I slowly woo her to the point where I am fairly confident that she will say yes upon asking her out. This was in the 90s, by the way, when you still had to manually ask girls out. A few more weeks go by, and I finally ask her out, and she accepts. I am completely smitten with this girl. I pick her up at her sorority house, which is an awkward deal if you have never done it before because a dozen girls answer the door to check you out. I take her to the best restaurant I can find/afford, and so far everything is going great. I order a bowl of the soup of the day and an entree. She orders something inconsequential to the story. As you can guess, the soup du jour is black bean soup. The waiter is this much more attractive than me, late 20s guy who is obviously scoping my date and subtly flirting with her. So my machismo is activated so much so that when said waiter suggests I order the cup of soup versus the bowl, as their bowls are very large, I take it as a shot across the bow of my fragile masculinity and insist that I can handle the bowl. The bowl is delivered, and it's more of a tureen. You easily could have fed a family 4 with leftovers, but now my dumb ass has to not only finish it, but do so acting like it's normal to eat a gallon of soup, as I made a big deal of it. I eat the soup, and I am already Thanksgiving stuffed when they bring out my entree, which I obvious have to eat as well, or admit to handsome waiter and date that I'm an idiot with such a fragile ego that I can't take an obvious suggestion. Despite my obvious physical discomfort, my date cannot seem to tell that I am so uncomfortable that I may explode from either end at any instant. Furthermore, as I get up to use the bathroom, my date asks if we can stop by her sorority house on the way to our movie, so she can pick up a sweater for the cold theater. Despite the obvious, I say, "No problem," and we get up to leave. As I am walking to the car, I get what feels like a knife to my belt line, followed by a gurgling noise as 8 pounds of shit are transferred from my intestines to my colon. I'm still not worried though, as we drive to her place, as it's like 5 minutes to the theater. We get to her sorority house, and she asks if I need to come inside for anything. I would like to think she wanted to fool around, but I think she has now picked up on my situation, probably from my profuse sweating and silence. No, I'm fine. And she heads inside to get her coat, and do God knows what else, cause she's in there for what feels like an hour. Then another sharp pain, another gurgle. I have now sweat, literally through my clothes, as I realize I have to shit, and I have to shit now. I get up and run to the front door, which isn't helping my situation any, as I desperately scramble to fling open the front door to the sorority house, locked of course. It's too late. I run around the side of the house, drop true, and proceed to shit my brains out, pressing my back hard against the side of the building in an attempt to keep from contaminating myself. I was not successful, though I immediately felt physically better. As I put myself back together, I realize, in sheer terror, that both my shoes and lower parts of my pants have been splattered. I start putting together a plan of action. Run to the car, run home, explain later, when as I am heading to my car I spot my date, sitting patiently in the passenger seat. Somehow on the spot I come up with, what I thought at the time, was a brilliant excuse, that I also have to stop by my house to change, as I stepped in dog shit while relieving myself on the side of her sorority house. She spared me from having to explain why I could not wait to use the bathroom at the theater. I assume she was distracted by the horrible odor in the car, but more likely she know the truth. Whatever the case, the angel did not make me elaborate on anything, and we had a great time the rest of the evening. Back in college, I met this girl and asked her if I could take her out to dinner. She said yes. I was ecstatic. Well, then I had to figure out where to take her to give her an idea of who I am and what I'm about. So I tried to do something that was thoughtful. I've learned that there are 2 types of gifts, expensive and thoughtful. If you can't do expensive, which I couldn't, then you'd better go hard on the thoughtful. This was taking place in the US South, but she was a freshman from Pennsylvania. I started thinking about things that be new and interesting to her. The answer came to me in a flash. Bojangles. I would take her to Bojangles. It's cheap, it used to have fairly decent food, but most of all it's southern, and we'd be able to discuss regional differences in food and culture. Of course, it's also fast food. Really crappy fast food. The evening of the date arrived. I drove her to the place and talked all about fried chicken and the South and tea, and how it must be different from the North. We got there and ordered at the register, then moved down to pick up our tray of food. Fancy, huh? We waited, and waited. I tried to make some small talk. You know, the small talk you make when something could interrupt your conversation at any moment. Then we waited some more, and more. My dinner, fried chicken, was on the tray. The drinks were on the tray. Her sandwich was not. So we stood there with the silence growing more and more awkward. Minutes rolled by that felt like ages. Finally, an employee noticed us standing there and said, "Did you need something?" I said yes, that we needed her sandwich. The employee turned around and grabbed the sandwich from the place it had been sitting the whole time we'd been standing there and put it on the tray. It had been there since the beginning. Not a great start. I picked up the tray and started walking back to a table with her. But there was an issue. Bojangles used to have the best sweet tea, so I always got a large. The cups they use for the larges are the kind that are smaller at the bottom, so they'll fit in your cup holder in your car. That's great for a car, but not so great for balancing them on a tray. It fell over. Fortunately, it fell over onto the tray, but not before knocking her drink off of the tray onto the floor. She had gotten the smaller drink, which came in the wax paper cup instead of the plastic cup that the larges are in. That's important, because it means that when her cup hit the ground at about a 30-degree angle, the cup crushed and launched the liquid inside out like a cannon. Onto her foot, drenching her in Pepsi or Coke or some soft drink. Being gentlemanly, I went and got her a new drink. Got back to the table and started trying to eat. I had ordered fried chicken, which I realized would mean that I had to eat with my fingers, which was stupid on a first date. Not wanting to look dumb, I decided I'd try to avoid eating with my fingers by using the plastic cutlery provided by the store. which would have been a fine idea if not for the fact that Bojangles only provides you with a spork. Not a fork, not a spoon, not a knife. A spork. A plastic spork, to be exact. I'm trying to pry the chicken off the bone with this plastic spork, and it's going nowhere. I can't get the chicken off the bone. I dug in a little deeper and really pulled, which bent the spork back a little, which served as a spring to launch my chicken breast across the table. I actually caught it before it could hit the floor. I remember thinking to myself, well, just enjoy this chicken because this date is going nowhere. I decided to just forget it and eat the dang chicken with my fingers. She was obviously not going to be going out with me anymore, so I decided not to worry about impressing her. Just try to get out of the situation without looking any dumber than I already did. I reached down and pulled off a nice piece of chicken with my fingers, and I missed my mouth. Seriously, I jammed the chicken onto my face. I don't know how I missed it, but I did. I just missed, which of course smeared chicken grease all over my cheek. The girl was looking at me like she was waiting for me to tell her, "It's just a prank, bro." I felt so dumb. We finished eating in silence. Finally, I said, "Well, let me take you back to your dorm." I gathered up all the trash on the tray, walked over to the garbage can and accidentally threw the whole thing into the trash. All of it, cups, the spork, napkins, the tray. All of it. I looked at the girl, she looked at me, and we both ran to the car. I've had some other bad dating experiences, but this one took the cake. I also remember being shocked when the car started when we were leaving. After the night I'd had, I was fully expecting to have to walk the several miles back to campus in the dark. I hadn't met him, but my friend worked with him, so he set us up. I was hesitant because I had gotten out of a bad relationship which culminated in an ugly breakup a few months prior, and I really wasn't looking to date. But I'd also kind of isolated myself and ultimately figured meeting someone new and having a night out couldn't hurt. Famous. Last. Fucking. Words. So it's about a week before the date, and Ben calls me. Asks a few basic questions, seems pretty normal but a little awkward, which I guess is to be expected because he knows next to nothing about me. Asks about my favorite color and where I'd like to go to eat and just normal shit like that. I tell him royal blue. Why? He says he was just wondering. Okay. I figured maybe he was going to bring a small, "Good to meet you, I hope this goes well, I'm trying to be friendly" sort of gift. Motherfucker shows up for our date with 24 white roses airbrushed royal blue. One rose would have been a sweet gesture. This is a bit much. He also informs me I'll be driving because his dad dropped him off. Of interest here, I'm 24 and he's 26. Says he doesn't want to learn to drive because he's scared of it. I ask if he was ever in an accident, maybe when he was younger, and nope. Just scared of the idea of driving. We live in a small city. From my house to the restaurant is a couple miles. All in town. In a small city. He critiques my driving the whole way. Why you drive closer to the left than my dad? You're half in the other lane. Be careful. I was nowhere near the other lane. I have never, to this day, and I am now middle-aged, been involved in an accident when I was driving. I'm a very good driver. We get to the restaurant. It's a regular Chinese buffet. One of the dishes is sweet and sour meatballs. The server comes over and asks how our meal is. Ben laughs, and when he does he sounds like a station wagon full of asthmatic seals, and says if I wanted meatballs I'd have gone to the Italian place across the street. Fuck me. What have I done? He then starts peppering me with questions, all beginning with if we start dating. If we start dating, how do you feel about spontaneity? If we start dating, how important is sex? He then tells me he's a virgin but is bisexual, although he has no interest in male genitals and has a tickle fetish. How important is sex with you, dude? Not at all. I'd actually rather die. Do you like massages? How many sexual relationships have you had? I'm allergic to cats. Would you consider rehoming him? My family is all out of state. Would you consider moving? I'm dying here. He then starts talking about his family, and then crying about his grandmother, who died when he was 8. And not just, "While this came up, forgive me I'm a little misty-eyed." He's sobbing. Somehow I survived dinner. We get back to my place. This is like 2002 before everyone had cell phones in their pockets. He has to come in and call his dad. I offer to just drop him off, but he says his dad is at his grandpa's and he, Ben, doesn't have a house key, that his dad prefers to drive him. I say fine, but keep your hands to yourself, don't touch anything, and once you get a hold of your dad, wait outside. On the drive back to my place, he tells me, I always told myself that I would wait a minimum of 1 year before considering sex with my girlfriend, but if we start dating I may drop it to 6 months because we're both older. How would you feel about that? And if you ever stay over, know I have a picture of my GMA on my dresser. I won't take it down, but I will turn it around when we have sex, like I always do when I masturbate. So you don't have to worry about that. I have to be on camera. This has to be a joke. We get to my place, he comes in, calls his dad, and while he's on the phone my cat comes in the room. I pick him up, kiss him on top of the head, and say I'll feed him in a minute. Ben says, have any men ever been intimidated by your relationship with your cat? Because that just made me really uncomfortable. I mean, you kissed him and talked to him. I told him to esteed and get out. He tried to apologize, but I was just done. Practically pushed him out the door. The moron even left me a couple VMs that week wanting to go out again. Then his last VM was basically wanting an exit interview. If you won't go out, will you at least tell me what put you off? Because I really liked you, and I don't know what you think went wrong. I've spent the last 20 years convinced I was being pranked. The friend who set us up never spoke to me again. Edit. After thinking about him again, after all these years, I just looked him up on FB. He has a unique last name, so I'm positive it's him, as well as his profile listing the city we lived in. So yeah, no doubt. He lives with his sister, and has a job as a candy stock boy with Walgreens. He's in his 40s. He also has a picture of his room which has a bed that's like a bunk bed, but there's no bottom bunk. It's so cool. That's called a loft bed. You have a loft bed, dude. Neighbor I'd known for a few months casually, just chatting outside the apartment. He asked me to go out dancing at a well-known local place that was tons of fun. Of course I said sure, sounds fun. We were college students, only a few of us had a car. He was embarrassed that he didn't, but I said I didn't mind driving. I'm a grown version of a tomboy. I drove a pickup with a canopy, and he'd only seen me in work jeans, boots, etc. I wore a gorgeous black and white bustier, heels, had my hair up. His first words? You're not wearing makeup. And he was actually angry about it. I laughed and said, you aren't either. There was a moment, I could tell he was reconsidering the date, so I asked if he wanted to skip it. I wasn't pissed off, just trying to avoid an uncomfortable evening. He seemed to shake it off and said we should go. When we got to the club, a man was standing by his car with the hood up, so I pulled up next to him and asked what the problem was. He said dead battery, hoping someone would give him a jump. I said no problem, popped my hood, opened the back, and when I got back to the front my date had lifted the hood. I started hooking the battery following the directions, which apparently no male has ever done in all humanity, and it's always been fine. And he got pissed beyond repair when I stopped him when he was trying to help take over, and said we had to do it the right way. He started to argue, but I said my car, my risk, my way. The guy I was helping had the good manners to ask why it matters what order the jumper cables are hooked up. That was the last straw for the guy I came with. He said I was just showing off. We still went inside and danced. I had some grease on one hand that didn't wash off, I tried, and that bugged him even more. I think I enjoyed holding my beer with that hand all the more, knowing it bugged him. I can't say it was all that bad of a date for me, but it might be one of the worst ones for him. I kind of hope so. Not being big in the club, party, or dance scene, I tend to use online sites to get dates. Part of the problem is since I live in the middle of nowhere, every person I'd even consider dating is at least an hour drive away. Anyway, onto the story. So, I met the girl on the online site. Her profile was nice. Her pictures were neat. She had a little extra meat to her, but I'm perfectly all right with that. We started messaging, found out she was a gamer, she liked science-wise stuff, had a quirky sense of humor, and we messaged several times a day for about a month. When we finally decided to meet up, we decided on going to a fancy Asian restaurant that was halfway, so neither one of us needed to drive too far, which was my idea because I like being practical, especially when I was having job trouble at the moment. Well, when I arrived, I noticed a few details. Her pictures did not do her justice, namely that she was easily about 350 to 400 lbs plus. She was wearing a skimpy outfit that had her fat rolls pouring over the edges. She had high heels on which I could not comprehend how they functioned on account of the law of physics. She must not have practiced putting makeup on in a long time, because she looked similar to a clown, and when she spoke, oh God. I understand everyone has their way of speaking. I know of accents, speech impediments, and vernacular, but she spoke in a way similar to Harold Green from the Red Green Show. Whatever, this is all superficial and not being one to judge too harshly, and I am not one to turn down a potential friend. I decided to just go with it, knowing I had no interest in pursuing anything beyond friendship. Sorry, not a chubby chaser. So we go in, and the first thing I notice is when the ladies at front see her, their eyes go wide. They look at each other and begin to speak rapidly in Cantonese/Mandarin before the one at the desk greets us and takes us to our seats with only one menu. That was a red flag because my date didn't have one herself. Our conversations weren't anywhere near as complex or interesting as they were online, which was another flag because she seemed to not grasp the basic topics we covered, such as games, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, gardening, or even local politics. I would chalk it up as anxiety, but no, she had no trouble talking. She just had no idea about any of these things. Then she decided to start talking about sex. Yeah, no. I don't mind talking about anything, really, but I don't want to hear about the amount of sex you've had, how you like your sex, what your last boyfriend did to you, your masturbation techniques, your sex toys, and just what you want to do to me. Not only is that rather inappropriate first date conversation topic, also EW. Finally, to save me from a topic that churned my stomach, the food arrived. And I saw just why she didn't need a menu. She pretty much ordered the entire goddamn thing plus several alcoholic beverages versus my soup, steamed rice, and Hunan pork dish. She proceeded to just a bit of everything, shove it on her plate, and then shove it in her mouth, showing the table manners of a hyperactive bonobo, all while trying to keep up the previous topic of conversation that I constantly tried to deviate from to something, anything, that wasn't an insult to my senses but to no avail. The night continued in this disgusting, sauce-covered trend for a few hours until she had basically eaten everything she ordered and had some of mine as well. The bill came to a little over $200, which I, of course, had to cover because she magically forgot any of her money. Sorry if it seems rude, but if someone wants to get some extremely expensive stuff, and I inform them beforehand that I don't have a lot of money, I expect them to chip in even a little bit. On our way out, she grabbed my arm, tried to pull me close, and whispered how she wanted me, and wanted me to come back to her place. I placed my hand on hers, smiled gently, and said no. Now please let go of my arm. Luckily she did, and so I gave her an extremely awkward hug, told her I was going home, and promptly jumped in my car and got the hell out of there. Last message I got from her, about an hour after I got home, was asking why I didn't find her attractive, and why I was such a pansy to not fuck her on the first date. I simply said, I would have nothing against continuing our conversations online, but I don't think we had much chemistry. He showed me his car, and he pulled up a breathalyzer that was installed by the driver's seat. He explained that he had to blow in it or the car wouldn't start, and also every 5 to 10 minutes or so the thing would beep and he would have to blow in it again. He made it seem like it was no big deal. He said jump in, and we can grab dinner. I said I'm just going to drive my own car to the restaurant, because I never let strangers drive me anywhere. He seemed totally shocked, but said okay. We got to the restaurant, and he said he didn't have any money, and asked if we could walk around a park instead. I said okay. This park was sketchy and gross. He immediately hiked his leg up really high on a tree, like almost doing the splits, and said he had to stretch. He then tried to coax me to walk some isolated trails, and I flat out said no, and that I wasn't comfortable being isolated alone with someone I didn't know. He kept saying, but you do know me. He then proceeded to talk about a bunch of boring nonsense. He asked if I wanted to go back to his place to have sex. I said no. He then got really annoyed and said he was wasting his time on this pointless date. I said I agree, and I'm leaving. I started walking back to my car, and he said, oh, I parked much closer. Let me give you a ride back to your car. And he put his arm around me hard and was basically making it so I couldn't get away. I played dumb and said something like, wow, you're so strong, do you work out? Blah blah. He began walking me to his car without letting me move. I decided to play into it and said, you know that you're holding me against you, I kinda do want to go back to your place. He lit up and said, oh yes, we can have so much fun. We got back to his car and he walked me towards the passenger side. By this point he had let up a bit, thinking I wanted to bang him. My heart started racing and my head was screaming for me to get away. I felt like if I got in that car I was doomed. Suddenly I said, OMG, what was that? Pointing behind him. He turned to look and I fucking Olympic sprinted away. He started to chase me, screaming at me, but he was too slow. He ran to get back in his car and peeled out trying to follow me. I called 911 and hid. I was able to give them his car and plate and description, etc. He didn't try to find me for long. He left the park and raced away. I stayed hidden until the police came. They drove me back to my car and said they would follow up with me, but that he hasn't technically done anything illegal. After that, I only met in public in the daytime for dating. It was scary as fuck. Met this girl online. We agreed to meet at a bar near my house. Being nervous, I get there about a half hour early. I go inside and sit at a table near the door and order a Coke. The waitress asks for my ID and then walks away. Soon after, a girl walks up and sits down at my table and asks me if I recognize her. I didn't at first, but then I realize it's this girl Amy who I used to be friends with in high school, but haven't seen in 13 years. We sit there and talk for a few minutes and we catch up. She's engaged and works at this bar, blah blah blah. She says, "Hey, do you remember my friend Nikki?" Nikki is a girl I had a quite large crush on when we used to hang out back in HS. I said yes, and she tells me Nikki is sitting across the room and she'll tell her I'm here. So Amy walks away and Nikki walks over and sits down. She's even cuter than I remember, and it don't take long for those crush feelings to come back. I learn that she has a 4-year-old daughter and she's single. She also likes a lot of the same music I do. We seem to really hit it off, but I'm constantly looking for this girl I'm supposed to meet. Nikki sits and talks to me for about 45 minutes. This girl I'm supposed to be meeting is late, and I'm beginning to feel like she stood me up, but I'm kinda glad because I really don't want to stop talking to Nikki. Finally, this girl and a group of about 4 guys walk in. The girl I'm supposed to meet was in a band, and she was coming after practice. She said the band might all show up to the bar for drinks. The girl eyeballs me, and they grab a table. I sit and talk to Nikki some more, but I feel like I should be going over to the other table, but I also feel like she's almost an hour late, fuck her. The whole time I'm nervous and not really acting like myself. I'm completely smitten with Nikki and worried about this other girl too. The girl wasn't attractive in the slightest, and very much not the type of girl I go for. This girl is really trashy. I'm in an odd predicament and my nerves are causing me to say stupid stuff to Nikki like, I'm just meeting this girl as a friend. I'm not interested in her. After about 15 minutes, I tell Nikki that I should at least go say HI and introduce myself. She tells me good luck, nice seeing you again, etc., and goes back to her original table. I walk over awkwardly to this table full of guys and this one girl and have to get her attention. When she finally looks over, I say, "HI, I'm KMFDM 781, how are you?" She says fine and looks a little confused, so I ask, "Aren't you?" And she says, "No, sorry." I'm pretty much thinking, F you, to myself. I walk back over to Nikki's table, she's getting ready to leave, and try awkwardly to explain what just happened. She kinda laughs it off, and she's on her way out the door. She's very nice and says her goodbyes to Amy and I. We had added each other as friends on Facebook while we were talking at my table before. I messaged her and apologized for not being myself and the situation mistake, and that we should maybe hang out sometime. I didn't hear back from her for 2 weeks or so. She never mentioned hanging out, and she said she was glad we caught up. She said I was just how she remembered me from HS. I was a completely different person in HS, and like to think I've changed since then. That was basically it. I've commented on some of her posts on FB, and she never acknowledges I said anything. As far as the girl I was supposed to meet, she said that she told me she would call me if we were going to meet. She never told me that. I told her she blew it, and I've never talked to her since. We were having a nice dinner of salmon and roast potatoes at a dining hall. As he started talking about his day, I took a bite of salmon and felt a horrible pain slide down my throat and stop. Not knowing what the fuck that was, I tried drinking some water. Deep in my throat I felt like I was being stabbed, and every gulp only made it worse. I realized this must be that stupid thing my mother had always warned me about when eating fish, that you have to be careful of fish bones or it will get stuck in your throat. Well, damn. I spotted some potatoes on my plate and started shoveling them in my mouth. You know, to knock the bone out or push it down or whatever. As the guy starts telling me a joke. Well, the plan backfired, and once again, the pain became much, much worse. By now, it felt like someone had driven a screwdriver into my throat and was occasionally shoving it in deeper. So the guy finishes his joke and pauses as he looks at me awaiting laughter. I burst into tears. He says, "That bad, huh?" I'm sorry. Ivy got other jokes. And I managed to whisper, my voice not working so well, that I have a fish bone stuck in my throat. He blinks. But it's boneless salmon. I didn't really know how to respond to this, so I just stared at him with tears running down my face. He goes, "So, do you want to leave? What do you want to do?" And I whisper that maybe if we just get more potatoes, it will go away, right? 3 plates of potatoes later, I have a fishbone still in my throat, and am bloated and never want to see a potato again in my life. This guy just watched in confused silence while I ate potatoes and cried. When I look up, he asks if it's still there. I nod, and we decide to go back to my room. As we pass by the salmon station in the dining hall, he points at the sign. "See? It's boneless." I didn't respond. When we get to my room, I called my mom, and she said I needed to go to the hospital to have it removed. Freaking out, I turned to go, and he insisted on coming with me to make sure I'd be okay. Sweet, right? Well, once there, he wouldn't leave. We waited 6 hours before any doctor or nurse would even see me in the ER, which I didn't mind. Some lady came into the bathroom while I was there, and suddenly blood was everywhere on the floor running into my stall. People definitely had bigger problems than my not being able to eat a fish properly. When a doctor came, it was some practicing med student who, without looking, said that most people think the bone is still there when it's not. Salmon bones don't show up on x-rays, so he told me to go home. I refused, having just had the bone partially dislodge then relodge, punching a second hole in my throat. He said too bad, and went to get me checkout forms. Well, the resident doc came and reamed this student guy out, and I'm thinking, oh thank God, they're actually going to fix me now. Well, he told the student, no, we won't release her until we're sure it's really gone. She could choke to death or it could puncture her lungs. Okay, really scary. But okay, they're going to fix it. So the doctor takes me into this room, and the student comes trooping in after him. He brings in this weird boxy thing with a long cord, as thick as your average electrical cord, with a slightly larger thing on one end. He tells me that, luckily for me, there's this new technology that can pick up salmon bones, and all they have to do is stick this cord through my nose and down my throat. I was not a fan of this idea. Worse, he said he didn't have time to do this, and it would be good practice for the med student to try it his first time. Worse still, all the med students and nurses in this fucking ward come trooping in to see this new technology, and worse even more, the med kid is now nervous, and his hands are shaking. So they spray some numbing stuff into my nose. Most of it missed and just got on my nose. And then this kid with shaking hands tries to stick an electrical cord/camera down my nose while 15 people watch. So I, who had managed to toughen up and stop crying hours ago, felt an electrical cord thing go into my nose, and then came pain. Med student, there's resistance. Nurse, well that shouldn't be. Just keep pushing. At this point, I have 2 holes in my throat and an electrical cord up my nose that's too big to fit, but the guy's jamming it in anyway. Yeah, I started crying again. Not sobbing or anything, just tears rolling down my cheeks out of sheer pain. This apparently freaked this kid out more, and the shaking got worse. I didn't need to see it, I could feel it in my nose. Oh yeah, and to get me into this side room they kicked a tiny little old dying lady with nasal cannulas out, and she was shooting me death looks from the hall at intervals. So the camera/cord finally goes in, and the kid looks through, and can see the bone. Kid. Oh, it's right there in her vocal cords. That could mean serious damage. Underscore. So he takes it out, and the docs arrange for an ear, nose, and throat doc to come the next morning to remove it. But they say they cannot do it themselves because they may permanently damage my vocal cords. Awesome. Here's the best part. The 15 folks watching the camera/cord procedure all wanted a turn. The resident doc came in and told me how important it is that people get experience, and how if they don't get it they could end up doing things slowly/poorly on people who could die at any second. So I felt bad and gave them permission, all 15 of them, to practice with the camera cord thing on me. This was an hour-and-a-half ordeal of them sticking things in my nose, and me crying, and them pulling it out again, and lecturing each other on technique and such. So this entire time the poor guy I was on a date with is sitting in the waiting room. Has been about 8 hours now, it's a school night, and it's 3 a.m. A nurse comes in and gives me a pill, and says it will relax me before this operation, and will numb the throat stuffs, and she says it may make me gassy. This is about when the nurses realized I had someone waiting for me in the waiting room, and told him he could come back and visit me. Yeah, while I was numbed up and not aware of much and gassy. Awesome. The next morning they put me under, got the bone out, and sent me on my way. At classes in the afternoon, I had a spontaneous nosebleed that was pretty bad. Tried to cover it up with tissues until the person next to me turned, saw a ton of bloody tissues, and their eyes got really wide. I left. The guy texted me several days later and kindly asked if I wanted to try redoing our first date. I told him I'd be happy to. Tinder. Yes, yet another Vietnam flashback for a lot of people out there. I didn't want a Tinder. I'm not sexually active, plus I know a vast majority of people use it to hook up. I was like 19, so I couldn't go out get a drink yet, and I played it safe. I had to, living at my dad's, on top of not able to drive. So the unfortunate circumstances they would sometimes meet my parents. I'm gonna tell you this because this was fucking terrible. I matched with a guy who just got back from deployment. He was friendly and seemed like a good dude all around. Before a date or anything we added one another on social media. To grasp what kind of person they were in game online. Didn't want to sleep with me right away, that was the vibe I got. Friday night rolls around, and it's busy. We're in College Town. Goes to Texas Roadhouse, and I got myself into a real pickle. So I'm 5 feet 11 inches. The guy is easily 5 feet 3 inches. Place was packed, and tried to have a conversation, and I can barely hear him. He tries to order me a salad, which I don't like salad. So big fat nope. After food, go back out to his truck. It's lifted. And sit inside. We were gonna go to a movie, but I was having second thoughts. And he went in to kiss me. I don't believe in kissing on the first date. And let me just describe how awful it was. For one, too much tongue. I have a repulsive gag reflex. And I was having so much trouble trying not to throw up. Like it was so wet, it felt like walking in downpour rain with the amount of saliva this man put on my mouth. It was like kissing a fish with a dog's tongue. And he was holding me down. I couldn't get him off of me. When he finally stopped, he was like, I love you. And am I a good kisser? I had to lie through my teeth. And I told him I wanted to go home. I didn't know the area well enough. And instead of taking me home, took me to a movie. He chose 50 Shades Darker. I've seen the other movies, there wasn't a lot of sex scenes. And I swallowed my fear. And I shouldn't have. I tried to run out of the theater. He wouldn't let me leave. And I am very socially awkward and big ball of nervous. I stomached through the whole movie. I told him I was ready to go home. And he said he needed to put his food away before taking me home. And I said okay, but I want to go home after. So he shows me his house. It's flooded. About 3 inches of water, and it's freezing. I have arthritis, and I literally can't move if things are way too cold. So I had mobility issues. He sees it, and ignores it, and goes into his room, and I'm waiting for like 10 minutes. I'm like, hey, can you take me home, please? Doesn't respond. His dog comes rushing out and jumps on me, knocks me down into the water spread throughout the house. So I'm soaked. I'm like, can I have some help? And he apologizes like I am so sorry. He just gets so excited. I said it's okay, but can you still take me home? I know having people over with all this water is probably not a good idea. Completely ignores my comment. Turns on his Xbox and logs me on. My friends see I'm online and start messaging me and invite me online to talk thinking I'm home. I talked to my buddy Bass and told him, hey, I'm not home. I'll be home in about 45 minutes. And asked me how it was going. My friends know when it's bad just with how I word things. And my date started getting irritated. I'm talking to another man and turns off his Xbox. He says, I don't want to share you with anybody. I want to keep you mine. So I'm very scared and trying to keep calm and not think about how high my anxiety is. Give 0 red flags. I ask again, can you take me home? He said I wanted you to stay. I said I have medical conditions I can't ignore, and I have a doctor's appointment the next day. Huge lie with small truths, still wouldn't let me leave. Tried to fake a bladder infection, which worked partially. Still wouldn't let me leave. Given the situation I was in. I stayed. Took me home the next day. Before dropping me off, said he wanted me to make me his wife. And I ghosted him to hell. I walked inside, my mom lets out the comment, well, normally you come home after a date. Just said a lot happened, and I don't want to talk about it. So a date on Tinder turned into me getting kidnapped, held hostage for sex, and with all my medical conditions going to shit at once. I am sorry if anyone in the armed services see this, but it really happened, and well, I couldn't get out if I tried. I told my friends and family where I was. Simply no one helped me or tried to. Oh dear. This happened to me just last week. I am on the Bumble dating app. I accepted a date with a guy on there who coincidentally happened to be a brother of a guy I have known casually for a few years. This mistakenly made me feel he must be safe and normal. I allowed this person to pick me up from my house. Huge mistake. One of the first questions he asked me is, are you racist? I replied, no, I don't feel I am. Why? He replied, he is not racist, but he doesn't like airs. At first, I thought I heard wrong. I did not. For the rest of the evening, much of his conversation consisted of using the N word repeatedly, coupled with questions asking me if I had ever dated an. He said he could never date a woman who had Ked 1. He was also overly hyperactive. I believe he might have been on something like speed, or something else. Honestly, I have no idea. He showed me screenshots of pics and comments from my private Instagram. He criticized my photos, and said I posted them for attention. He told me he Googled and researched me. He said he did not like the thought of any woman of his receiving comments on her photos by airs. He loved using the N word. I asked how he was able to obtain any photos since my Instagram is private. His answer was because he is ex-military. He proceeded to tell me about men he had killed in Iraq at point-blank range during Operation Freedom. He also announced he wanted me to post only photos of him and I on my social media accounts. He asked what I was doing the next day, and I said I am busy. The following day I received a text from this racist maniac saying he's sitting in his vehicle in my driveway. I texted back I am not home, and I am disturbed to hear he is in my driveway. I explained I didn't want to see him anymore. He replied with several long texts begging me to be with him, telling me I am beautiful and amazing. He said he found and kept 2 strands of my hair. He spoke as if we had been dating for months. When I said I barely know you, please stop, he replied he would. He did not. I received more pleading text messages. Then I received a text asking to just hang out as friends. I said, no. We are 2 very different people, and it's best we don't see each other at all. He then replied with very mean name calling and telling me I am fat. He called me Miss Piggy. LOL, he said 4 people had told him I am a fat bitch. He said he has $750K in the bank, and that was not enough to feed me. He told me to F off. I hope I will never hear from him again. I have saved all the texts from this man in case he ever shows up at my house again. I have them to show to the police. I have blocked him on all my sites, and hopefully he won't see this or anything else connected to me. This one Bumble date was definitely with a scary dude. Asterisk, I want to add that after this very upsetting experience, I deleted my profile on that dating app and have not been on any dating sites since. After my divorce, I tried a couple of dating sites for about 3 months total, and was not pleased with the quality of any of the men I encountered. After all I have been through, I have taken a complete break from socializing, and it has remained this way since January. I had many experiences on dating sites, a few weird situations here and there, the odd catfish, but most of them pretty good. This one is still quite fresh, but it has been by far the worst experience on a dating site, and it has left me sick to my stomach. It's a lot to read, so sit down with a hot cup of tea or whatever preferred beverage. So I matched with this guy, Jay, and we had an awesome conversation right away, great chemistry and all that, and we hit it off pretty quick. He mentioned he had kids, and they would always come first, which is not a problem for me at all. I assumed that he wasn't with the mother of his children anymore, as he was working and living 3 hours away from them. I actually found it admirable that he still made time for his kids every week to see them, even though he had a crazy work schedule. We talked for several weeks through text and phone calls, and he was the sweetest, attentionate, funny. He would send me pictures of him and his kids having fun, and it made my heart melt. My pastime is to paint cute portraits, and he asked me to paint his kids, which I gladly accepted. By then I was pretty keen to meet him, and when the first date came I was super happy and excited. It was the cutest date. We played some board games in the car and ate popcorn next to a lake. Talked until late together in the car. While we were talking, his phone was pinging quite a lot, and at one point he reached to look at the messages. And I didn't mean to glance, but the corner of my eye caught a text message from Princess. The girl in me of course was alarmed, but hey, I thought, we are only on the first date, and we haven't known each other for so long. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and don't ask questions otherwise he will think you are crazy. So I shoved that on the back of my head and continued staying in contact with him. He would take news every day and talk about him and what he wanted, explain to me that there was never any love in his marriage, so that's why it was over now. But he was looking for real love, a connection, someone to be with, etc. But he would always put his kids first. He said how the most important thing for him was honesty and communication. I thought how cool that he's got the vulnerability to talk about this to me. I was quite flattered, and my heart melted further. Now comes the second date. He asked me if I'd be keen to come up to his place, and even offered to pay for my gas money. I declined the money, but I thought it was really thoughtful of him. so jumped in my car and did the 3H trip to see him. We spent a lovely time together, and of course we ended up having sex. He seemed quite nervous, and I won't go into details, but there was some malfunction in the system. Honestly, I didn't care. I thought it was quite sweet actually, and guess what? Yes, my heart melted again. I just wanted to give all my TLC to this sweet, loving guy that goes through a hard work schedule to provide for his children. He went out of his way to come and see me at my place, when he had already a couple hours drive from his kid's place, and 3 hours left to drive to get home. It made me feel really special and appreciated. We continued to stay in contact, but what I shoved at the back of my head came back. This guy is too good to be true. My gut feeling was telling me that the whole thing smelled fishy and weird. I couldn't forget the princess text, and he actually never mentioned divorce. He would just call the mother of his children the ex. Still went back to see him. We went for a walk, and he told me about his upcoming trip to Brazil in a month and a half. And I know that it was so good for him to get some time for himself for once. We went to the post office to renew his passport and all that stuff. He opened up about his situation, how he was actually currently in the process of divorcing his wife. I thought that it was very strange he didn't mention that before, but thought that hey, fair enough, it's a quite difficult subject to talk about. When we were back in the car, I had his phone in my hands to choose some music, and bing, comes a message from a lovely looking girl from Instagram. Hey babe, I hope you had a good rest. That wasn't his ex-wife. My heart just skipped a beat, and I went cold. He noticed, and asked what was wrong, what he did wrong. I couldn't get a word out of my mouth. Now guys, you are probably going to tell me, hey, he never promised you anything, which is true, but I can't help it, I'm a girl. It is imprinted in my genes, I guess, but I just want to be loved and cherished. So when we came home, I was quite emotional, and I told him that okay, he didn't promise anything, and it hasn't been so long we've been dating. But if his thing is to have several girls in his life, great for him. I'm not there to judge, but it's not my thing and I don't want to be a part of it. I told him that this message reminded me of a very bad memory from when I found out my first love cheated on me. He looked at me, and he was very understanding. He told me that he wanted to fix this. He would delete the girls that were talking to him. I told him it wasn't my point. If he is involved with those girls, I can't stop him from doing so, but I can stop myself from seeing him. He looked at me in the eyes and told me how he was someone that wanted just one person in his life, and that he was seating next to her right now. I wanted to believe him, so I did. He sounded so genuine. Later on in the evening, I still saw a message on the corner of my eye to Princess about a renewal of something, but my stupid ass just ignored it and thought he was probably calling his daughter like this or something. If you are still reading me, we are now close to the end of the story. I was trusting and happy to go see him again a couple of weeks later. So I did, and when I came over he wasn't there, but he had left the door open for me. He was still working at some friends, so he wouldn't be back for about 3 hours. I made myself comfortable, went to take something in the fridge, and then I saw on his calendar, only a month and a half until I can see C. Right away all the dots connected. We girls are pretty nifty at finding out who is who, and it was fairly easy to find out that C lives in Brazil, and is the one that sent the, hey babe, I hope you had a good rest message. I'm also pretty sure that she was the princess contact on his phone. They were talking about the passport renewal. Funny enough, she looks like a more beautiful version of myself. I was extremely disappointed, so sent him a message to tell him I saw the calendar and connected all the dots, and that I understood he was going to see someone important to him in Brazil. But I was sorry, I couldn't go further in this, as I've been quite clear that it's not my thing to share. I was packing my stuff back and searching for a hotel room when he answered back. He told me I was right, and he was sorry, he had been selfish, but we could remain friends if I wanted. Then something about how I deserved better and whatnot. I didn't answer back. I thought, how can I be friends with someone that lied with such ease? And if he lied about this, maybe he is lying about the divorce? I don't want to be friends. I went up in the room to gather the rest of my stuff and noticed the envelope that I used to give him the painting I did for him. Inside was the painting, along with a picture of him and his wife. I took the painting and thought that I didn't want my art to be part of this guy's life. I had just broken up with someone who wanted only a warm body to ease her rebound from breaking up with her ex, while I wanted more of a committed relationship. So suffice it to say I was a bit lonely and looking for someone more on the same page. I reactivated my OkCupid profile and resumed the search. She messaged me, which is a bit out of the ordinary, but hardly a red flag to me. I was of course thrilled. Her profile indicated she spoke a ton of languages, was in a PhD program, and liked motorcycles. She overall seemed like someone brilliant and eccentric. She was also quite attractive and lived very close by. Her first message to me: "Why are you so gosh darn beautiful?" So we chat for a while. Dude, she was smart as hell, and I was very interested, and phone numbers get exchanged. One cold evening in December, I hunkered down to write a final project due in 18 hours. I pop an Adderall and get to work. On one of my breaks, she gives me a call, and we chat, and all of a sudden, she starts questioning me about every tiny detail on my profile in a very accusatory tone. Of course, since I was under the influence of a medical-grade stimulant and am an anxious individual at even the best of times, my anxiety spiked, and I had to stop the conversation, apologizing profusely. I was not in the best mental state at the time, of course. Maybe I overreacted. But her response? For the next week, she would call me nonstop. My phone would not stop vibrating. She literally kept dialing and redialing, as though she were hovering over the phone and waiting for the call to hang up so she could redial again. I had to shut my phone off, because every time I blocked her number, it would work for about half a day before she started calling me from a different number. Her last message to me: "Answer and speak, or I'll kill you." Yes, she threatened me, and ended it with a hard emoticon. The universe could have undergone heat death and collapsed back into a primordial singularity, and I would not have been able to go nope 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 enough times to express my feelings about the whole situation. Fortunately, the next time I tried OkCupid, I found a wonderful, loving, and most importantly non-crazy person with whom we enjoyed a few months of joy and growth before we had to break up because of life circumstances. My worst experience was going out with a guy who I was attracted to on OKC, but we hardly messaged beforehand. He wanted to save that for the first date, which I understood. His name, I can't recall it. I think it was Aiden or something in the A range. On our date together, he was instantly a very shy and awkward person. That's okay, I thought. I can handle that. We both went to the mall together since I needed to grab bleach and color for my hair, and there was a great place that gave me discounts because I shopped there frequently. I told him I was considering going green or pink, and he told me that I'd look terrible and I should do blue. Yes, this man I just met had tried controlling my hair color, and when I say this, I purchased the colors I wanted, and he said, "I can't be seen with you looking like a clown." Okay, I figured his sense of humor was just offbeat. He seemed like he was kidding, so I thought. Once I got all of my stuff, he asked if I was hungry, and we both went and got a meal together. This was when all my bunches kicked into overdrive. My gut was telling me to run out. In our conversation, he is pulling up my dating profile on his phone and reading it, and then asking me questions based off of it. He asks me my political views. I politely decline and say I don't like talking heavy on a first meeting. I like Trump. I bet you enjoy Bernie, huh? This was the election period, and then he gave me a speech about how Bernie Sanders would ruin this and that, and it was entirely uncomfortable. Did he care? Not a bit. I accidentally ate meat product that time, before I was vegetarian, and it was during Lent. I told him, "Oh no, I wasn't supposed to eat meat today, it's Friday," and he said religion was stupid and only idiots believe in religion. I told him that I didn't appreciate him saying that, and then this begins the argument. "So if you're Catholic, how are you bisexual?" "Because I like men and women." "So you've been with both?" "Yes." "Like truly?" "Yes." "So you aren't a virgin?" "Why are you?" "I've never had a girlfriend." "I can see why." "Okay, that's not a bad thing, we're young." 18, 19 at this point. "How many people have you had sex with?" "I don't want to answer this question. It's making me uncomfortable." "Tell me." "No. I don't mind lesbians, but I hate gay men." "Okay, I've had it at this point." "Why?" "I don't have anything against you. Men are just wrong. I have friends who are gay, and I can't sit here and listen to you talk like this and continue our date on these terms." It was a bit of back and forth, and I left soon after. He tried following me in the parking lot, and I wouldn't allow him to drive me home. He texted me that evening saying he had a great time, and I ignored his messages that followed days after before blocking him. This is a snippet of our conversation. He also insulted women who sleep around, people who date under 18, and an array of insults saying I wore too much makeup and that he isn't a guy who only wants sex. I'm not like other guys. Yeah, you're worse. This guy was a total jerk, and he would find many ways to make me feel bad, and he'd get a rise out of it. He knew more about me than I did about him, and this was a big mistake. It was probably one of the worst mistakes I've made, sitting there when I knew I should have walked out sooner. Luckily, he didn't live too nearby where I lived in Utah, so he wasn't able to run into me again unless he tried. I had menial conversation with someone on a dating app who kept trying to meet with me. He was 2 hours away, so the timing was never right, and as such was not really a big deal to me. That would end up being a good thing. I sat in the restaurant with my friend, as my flight was getting ready to leave in a few hours. I was finally getting ready to try the local pizza and pub joint that everyone, including that guy, recommended. As we sat there waiting for our food, I felt someone's gaze on me. It was an intense stare that I could feel and see out of my peripheral vision. I didn't understand it, as he was there with his wife and daughter. He was being so obvious in his staring that it was a tad disturbing. When they finally finished their meal and was leaving the booth, he stared hard at me once again, as if he was almost willing me to notice him. I asked my friend if she noticed him staring. She said it was odd. My text notification dinged and the guy said, "I see you finally made it to get pizza." I asked, "Were you here? Why didn't you come say hi?" He replied, "I was leaving and didn't want to interrupt. You're even prettier than your picture. That doesn't usually happen." I replied, "Thanks." I told my friend about the text. She sat wide-eyed looking at me. I bet that was the guy in the booth next to us. That is why he was willing you to make eye contact with him. What an ass. He was on a dating app with a wife and kid. He did not look like his picture, which is why I didn't recognize him, as he had noticed me. He found me on Instagram and messaged me on there, thinking he got away with not being found out. He still kept trying to flirt and schedule a meeting. I ignored every message. That is one of the many reasons why dating online can be discouraging. I believe I was catfished by a creepy businessman. I spent some time casually on Tinder for a while. I met some nice people, shockingly. Went on hikes, out for coffee, dinner, music festivals, and never slept with any of them. Crazy, right? There are cool people online who don't just want to screw other people. Anyhow, there was this one guy who desperately wanted to meet up at a bar sometime. First red flag was that he was insanely good looking and wore expensive designer clothes. And while I think I'm reasonably attractive, he was still much too pretty. It struck me as odd that he was looking for a hookup, but yet was totally fine to meet up for a drink and just chat. All his photos were selfies, not modeling shots, and they all seemed consistent with being taken around the same time, so I figured meh. Why not? He asked to meet up at around 4:30 p.m., which was extremely early to be meeting at a bar. Oddly, I found this comforting as it would be daylight and the bar would be empty. I arrived on time, it was raining, and I entered the bar to see 2 tables occupied and a friendly bartender asking me what I wanted. Immediately I felt eyes on me, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I casually looked over my shoulder. At one of the occupied tables sat 4 overweight businessmen, and one of them was staring intently at me. Weird. But whatever. My phone bings. "Hey, 15 minutes away, sorry traffic." I reply, "No problem, just waiting inside." I connected to the available Wi-Fi and sat down. Immediately his status updated. "Jack is less than 1 kilometer away." Huh, that's weird. Probably just a Tinder glitch. I can't imagine the location is super accurate. If he's 15 minutes away, he's definitely still on the highway. 15 minutes went by, then 20, no reply from him. I got up to look outside, and when came back and I saw the same businessman approaching me with his phone in hand. "Hey, you look like you are waiting for someone. Can I buy you a drink while you wait? My friends would be happy for you to join us." Reading this, it probably doesn't sound all that creepy. It's possible he could be asking because I'm there alone and clearly bored. It still gave me an uncomfortable feeling. His friends looked over and gave me a thumbs up. The guy was in his late 50s and I was 24. He also reeked of stale cigarette smoke and stood far too close to me. It was uncomfortable, but not quite enough to cause suspicion. I was about to say no, but thank you. But what he said next was really what set my radar off. "Come join us, we'll look after you." Young guys can never show up on time, can they? Always gotta rely on the older men. I froze. How did he know I was meeting a guy? And not a female friend? Or a group? My heart started racing, but I smiled and said, "Actually, my ID is still in the car, I'll go grab it." He said he'd order me a drink, and I left, and immediately hopped in my car and waited, watching the bar door. A little less than 3 minutes went past, and the guy came out and looked around. 2 minutes later they all came out, got in his 2001 Mercedes and left. I still had Wi-Fi, and I refreshed Tinder. Jack is less than 5 kilometers away. Jack is 15 kilometers away. Jack is 22 kilometers away. It's now 1 hour since Jack last messaged me. My phone buzzes. I've just arrived, and am sitting at a table now. Have I been stood up? Winky face. I was still sitting outside the bar in my car. No one had gone inside, and no one had come out. I reply, I'm still here actually. Where are you? And that was the last I heard from Jack. I don't know for certain whether those guys were luring young women into their group for drinks, but my intuition told me something was off with them. Not good. I gave online dating several chances spanning years, and the only changes I saw was it just got worse. Keep in mind, I was a male looking for females. And also keep in mind, I never had an issue meeting women until I went online. To be fair, I tried most platforms at various times, some more than once. The platforms ranged, but weren't really the problem generally. The lower you get, the worse they were. I did everything I was supposed to do, and I wasn't typical on there. My bios were probably in the top 90%. See my account here, I have no issues writing. My pictures were recent, I was always honest, and I was never a serial liker, that apparently most men are on these things. I was selective, but open and reasonable. Not to sound arrogant, but I know more than half the women who never responded to me would have probably liked me had they given me a chance. But as a guy on these things, I'm just one of hundreds of profiles that liked or messaged a female at any given time, so I don't exactly blame any of them at the same time. While women have that advantage, it isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And in all fairness, a large percentage of men give the good ones a bad name. Both sides have issues. Communication, or lack of it, was another issue all around, and is sadly a dying art. But it is what it is. I've written about that enough times on here. The only good that came from it, believe it or not, was sharpening up my knowledge of scammers/ghosters/catfish, write up about the various platforms, and to be able to write about some of the experiences/platforms on here. I guess you can say any experience, good or bad, is an experience. In some cases, I've helped some people out in different ways, though it's mostly to identify scammers. I did entertain myself sometimes with some of the scammers, so there was some cheap entertainment right there. I was going to write a massive article about all the platforms, but deemed it to be a waste of time since things are always changing. Another decent thing was going on some dates. Not that most of the dates amounted to anything, but being an online reviewer, I was able to review a lot more places, mainly restaurants, than I probably otherwise normally would have. I know some people personally that have met their person through online dating. The issue was that was 10, 15 plus years ago. I know of no one personally that has had any real success with online dating in recent years. I do think at one point it was a viable option, but it changed for the worst as time went on, and by the time I got to it, it was probably largely a shell of what it used to be. So to sum up my experience, it was one of the most demoralizing and demeaning things I've ever done, and in the end, it was a large waste of time. I will never do online dating again. It's horrid. I had just gotten out of my first marriage, a 20-plus year marriage that was actually over long before it officially ended. In fact, it was the Saturday after I had received notice on Friday that my divorce was final. I made the decision to sign up for an online dating site. Since I was 55 at the time, I chose the site ourtime.com. I actually went out and bought a camera to connect to my computer to get a few pictures for the site. I think I spent almost an hour trying to get a good picture. Finally, I got one that I thought was okay and created my first ever online dating profile. The first few days I got a few responses. At the time, I was living in a small, rural community, so there were just not that many people close by. But I found one person who seemed nice. She lived in Irving, a suburb of Dallas, and a little over an hour drive from me. We exchanged a few messages online. Actually, I was really inexperienced at dating and knew nothing at all about proper online dating etiquette. So, when Gina sent me a message, I would wait a day or two before responding. I did not want her to think I was a creepy stalker. As a result of my ignorance, it took almost 3 weeks of back and forth, or rather wait, and forth, before we scheduled our first date. But we met for dinner on a Sunday night and hit it off really well. I thought Gina was one of the most beautiful women I had ever met. She was intelligent, witty, fun, and interesting. I wanted to see her again, and really soon. One of the problems, though, was our work schedules. I was in the midst of a really intricate and busy project with a client in the Eastern Time Zone, which meant I needed to be at my desk and ready to work by 6:30 my time, Monday through Friday. Gina's office did not open until after 9 o'clock, and her work days were Wednesday through Sunday. When we planned our second date, we planned it for a Monday night. When that Monday arrived, I was completely swamped at work and knew that Tuesday was going to be even worse. I got a message from Gina questioning my sincerity and expressing reservations about our date. For strictly work reasons, I also had reservations about our date. I took the opportunity and canceled. Now my plan was to wait 2 weeks. I have no idea why I choose that time frame, and try to reconnect. I really liked Gina and really wanted to see her again. So, I am home alone on Friday night. I am thinking about Gina, how much I would like to call her, how I hoped we could have a second date and see if the sparks were still there. But, in my mind, I have to wait at least a few more days. Then my cell phone rings. It is Gina. We talk. I explain how busy I have been with work and how I really would like to see her again. We make plans for a second date, this time on a Saturday night. Before long, I am spending most of my time with Gina. In a few months, we rent an apartment together, and we have been together ever since. On February 27th, 2013, Gina and I married. So my most unforgettable online dating experience was my first and only online dating experience. Gina and I are still married and more in love than ever. From a young age, my biggest life goal was to get rich. My second biggest life goal was to find someone perfect and get married. I attacked each goal with zeal. However, goal 1 interfered with goal 2. When you're on the road all the time seeking wealth, you don't have the time to do anything but make meaningless, short-term sexual liaisons or fleeting romances with no holding power. I did get rich for a while, but at a great cost. I even met the perfect woman I should have married. But I didn't marry her, and that's a regret. But the desire to find that perfect woman became the great white whale of my life, and I pursued every possible avenue to the point of near mental illness. In one 18-month period, I dated almost 100 different women. I would ask out women in grocery stores, at parties, friends of friends. I didn't care. At that point, there was an emotional hunger that couldn't seem to be filled. I would date and discard, date and discard. I joined every sporting gig imaginable, from co-ed volleyball to biking to running to hiking. I went to concerts and charity balls and did the museum tours, watched opera in a tuxedo or ballet. I went to musicals and Shakespeare on the lawn, everywhere that women might hang out. I bumped into them on purpose and spilled their drinks, so I had to buy them another, an excuse to talk. To that end, I joined every matchmaking service you can think of, from lunch dates to Yahoo Personals, Matchmaker, Match, OKC, POF, over a dozen of them. Most of them are long out of business now. I even ran a dating organization for 5 years, a progressive dinner thing for people over 40. The only thing I didn't do was meet women in bars. I don't drink, and picking up women in bars takes a certain kind of game I just don't have. I had various goals. I could meet someone, or just have an interesting experience, or make a friend, or get laid, or actually meet the love of my life. After dating hundreds, perhaps thousands of women, I decided there were 4 possible outcomes. You like her, but she doesn't like you 60% of the time. She likes you, but you don't like her 30% of the time. You both don't like each other 9% of the time. Or the Holy Grail, you both like each other 1% of the time. So I decided that to meet that one person in a 100, I would have to date 100 women minimum. I've had every possible experience you can think of, from women humiliating me over my looks to women fucking me in a public bathroom on a first date. I've seen so much. I could write books on it. I've been catfished. I've been stalked. I've been heartbroken. I've been conned by gold diggers. I've been trolled by religious nutbags. I've been sought by the desperate. I've been lied to. I have had many, many experiences. A couple of memorable experiences include heartbreak. Once I met a woman from some personal service at a nice, candlelit restaurant. I don't know how we ended up there, since I usually like to go low-key on a first date in case it goes south fast. But this woman, when she walked in, was beautiful. Petite, wearing a clean, pressed dress, with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was the personification of innocence and beauty. By chance, we got a corner table next to brick wall and a window. It was pouring outside and we were cozy. The wall blocked off the restaurant noise. We could have been the only people there. Our eyes locked, we chatted and laughed. We told stories, we held hands. Hours passed. They seemed like seconds. When the time finally ended, there were tears in her eyes. "I never thought anything like this could happen," she said, looking into my eyes. I was holding both her hands in mine. "I think you're a really good man," she said softly. We walked out in the rain to her car. She hugged me in the rain, with her head on my chest. I really want to see you again, she said. On any other blind date, I would have invited myself into her car and tried to make out. Not now. It would have ruined the moment. She handed me her business card from work with her phone and email on it. She wrote her phone number on the back. I put it in my pocket and watched her drive away. I thought, this is it. This is the one. My work has paid off. Rarely had I felt that way about a date. I went home and watched the clock until the next day, when I could call her. I wasn't playing the 3-day rule, where a man waits 3 days to call. She was the one. I didn't need to play games. I wanted it to be real. You can't say the wrong thing to the right person. So the next day I called her. The number didn't work. I emailed her. It bounced back. I called her on the office phone. She no longer worked there. It was a fraud. At the end of it all, it was some kind of fraud. I can't figure out how or why it was a fraud. I couldn't figure out what the con was, or the gag, or even the motive. Was it just for a free meal and drink? Was it just to hone acting skills? It all seemed so real. How could it have all been so fake? How could I have been so conned, so gullible? It was confusing and very disheartening. Of course, I never heard from her again. I attempted to track her down with no luck on the off chance that there was some mistake, that she was still looking for me. But she wasn't looking for me. It was some kind of gag for her. That was pretty bad. I've also had bad blind dates, one I have discussed on Quora a few times, where the women looked me up and down, threw $20 on the table and said, with utter contempt, "This sure as hell isn't happening," and walked out. That was painful and humiliating. Even the waitress pitied me. Having the waitress see it was even more humiliating. I once met a woman through a personals on Craigslist who was 20 years younger than I was. I have written about this on Quora also. She stalked me for years. Even after telling her to go away, she emailed me multiple times a day, saying her Piskik told her we would always be together. Once, I came home from work and found a pair of wedding bands in my mailbox. I had never told her where I lived. It took over 5 years to get rid of her. The scariest part is that she's a Harvard-trained medical doctor. I met a woman at Cafe Vittoria who was filling out a survey as we talked. After 30 minutes of drilling me with questions, she stood up and said, "You failed," and walked out. She left me with the bill. I met a woman I talked with for weeks online, who told me she loved the same things as I did: biking, running, hiking, adventure. When I met her at the bar of her choice, it turned out to be the scariest, most disgusting dive in a bad part of town. And she weighed well over 300 pounds. She was a liar. I excused myself to the bathroom and escaped through a kitchen exit. I was aided by a stranger who saw the whole thing and told me to run. Another time I was standing in the door of Cafe Vittoria, waiting for my date as crowds of people strolled back and forth. I picked her out of the crowd, and even as she walked towards me I said, "She wants to fuck." And within an hour we were rolling around in the back seat of my car. I don't know how I knew just from looking at her walking towards me, but I did. It was easy. I was amazed. Once I went on a hike with blind date up in the Blue Hills. I've also written about this on Quora. Halfway up I got the runs. I had to dash off deep into the woods to relieve myself and use my underwear as TP. Shaking in the legs, I returned to her. She was beautiful but looked annoyed. I was away a long time. I probably no longer smelled spring fresh. In any case, she was long gone after that, never to return. On a trip to the same place, I hiked up Blue Hills to the fire tower on top, where this girl, whom I had never met, dropped her jeans in the top and ordered me to do it from behind while she looked at the scenery. Hikers milled around the bottom of the tower and could have come up any time. She liked the risk. We did this a couple of other times, but she disappeared. Once on Quora, a man wrote a story of a fellow who spent his whole life seeking the perfect woman. On his deathbed, he was asked why he never found her. "Ah," he said, smiling feebly, "but I did find her. She wouldn't have me. She was looking for the perfect man." So much wisdom in that short story. There is no perfect. When it comes to dating, the best is the enemy of the good. If you're always looking for greener grass, you'll never find it. You have to know when what you have is good enough for you. It's not settling. It's knowing that there are no perfect people or situations, and that everyone is unique and has a story. You can learn something good and even important from everyone you meet, even the 300-pound woman in a dive bar in Quincy. We're all people. We all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. We all deserve honesty, even if that honesty is painful, rather than cowardly ghosting or abandonment. Everyone has an ego. Everyone can be hurt. It's easy to get a date. It's hard to make the date stick. The adage of the movie, Next Stop Wonderland, is true. The magic isn't in what gets you together. The magic is in what keeps you together. Perhaps there's still hope for an aging bachelor then. After I got divorced, I decided to try Tinder. I actually have 2 bad experiences. Nothing fatal or creepy, and no existential threats. It just sucked and convinced me to try the old-fashioned approach. Say hi to a girl and ask for her number. Free dinner. For so many reasons, I think that honesty is always the right thing. So when I met a seemingly nice girl and asked her out, I was just myself. She asked me about my work. I'm a lawyer. She asked me what kind of lawyer. I told her. And then she started asking me, "Isn't it expensive to live in Japan?" Of course, I didn't see where she was going with that, so I honestly said, "It pays well enough that I don't have to worry much." She ordered an expensive dinner, several drinks, and dessert, and I asked for the check. She stood up and said, "You don't mind getting this, right? You make a lot of money, don't you?" And she walked out. Using Tinder to find clients. It's not what you think. After the expensive dinner, I decided to go for coffee on the next date. I met a girl for coffee, and she gave me her card. She was in real estate. One thing about dating in Japan is that some girls like newbies. They don't want a guy who has dated a lot of Japanese girls. They want to be your first Japanese girlfriend. So I thought it was a good thing when she asked me how long I'd been in Japan. Just a few weeks at that time. She seemed very interested about my work, what brought me to Japan, and how long I planned to stay. I was looking for a relationship, so these questions sounded like she was deciding whether or not to date me. We decided to meet for coffee. Coffee went well. She asked me more about my work and what part of town I worked in. These are important things because if you date someone, you don't want to be too far away. That can be difficult on a relationship. We decided to meet again a few days later. When she sat down, she put a folder on the table. "Okay, when do you want to start looking at apartments? I found several that meet your requirements." She wasn't interested in dating me at all. Every question she asked was geared toward finding my housing requirements. I've seen a lot, but I didn't expect that on Tinder. I've talked to several other foreigners in Japan, and they all have similar experiences. I think another common one is girls who flirt to get free English lessons. They pretend to be interested and go out a few times, but when he moves in, she says she has a boyfriend, and she just wants to be friends. I think someone forgot to tell Japanese girls that Tinder is a dating app. All these 26 years of my life, I have never been in a relationship, never dated any girl. I am completely immersed in my study, research, career goals, etc. In addition, my shy and introvert nature have been a major bottleneck to start the conversation with any girl. Many times an intense wave of loneliness kicks in, and I used to listen to sad songs, write some poems to soothe my restless mind. Anyhow, after giving so many thoughts, I decided to open my Tinder account. I read numerous articles, watched various videos on how to Tinder. I am an average-looking guy, so was really not expecting to get likes from so-called beautiful Tinder queens. I put some info about my education, my research, hobbies, favorite music, movies in the bio. I was ready to explore the adventures of Tinder. After 1 week, I got a notification that someone's liked my profile. But, in order to see who liked your profile, you need Tinder Gold, which costs $14.99 per month. I was really hesitant to purchase this, but finally decided to dedicate that money, which I thought would be beneficial to gain any relationship, friendship experience with the girls. I got Tinder Gold. Match 1. Some semi-nude Chinese girl had liked my profile. Needless to say, it was a fake profile. Still, I matched that profile just to see what is next. Hello there. She, what is your number? So my guess was correct. Pretending not to know what his number. I am a student in XYZ University. What about you? She, what is your mobile number? I think we should get to know each other a little bit, and then we can exchange the numbers. No reply for 2 days. I unmatched her. Match 2. One black American girl / student. Yes, I am also studying in the USA. With 2 cigarettes in her mouth and the beer bottle in hand. Again, I was really not interested, but I really wanted to utilize my $14.99 on this Tinder Gold plan. Hello, good morning. She, good afternoon. What you do study at XYZ University, she mentioned student in her bio. She, good evening. LOL *, good night. Yes, it was around 11 p.m. Immediately unmatched her. I was getting frustrated as I got similar two other useless matches, one from a shirtless guy, and I was not getting matches to whom I sent the like/super like. Here are some of the bios of such Tinder queens. But me a cheesecake or forget me. I am a slut for ranch. Gonna swipe right who's way out of my league. Make me laugh, and MURS. And much more stupid, cringe-worthy things. This continued for 18 to 20 days. I canceled the Tinder Gold subscription, disabled my profile from Tinder, and finally, uninstalled it. I was back to my normal and lonely life. I was wondering, even after having good profile pictures, interesting bio, as I already mentioned that as a PhD student I researched really well in these aspects. On the account, what went wrong? Why I couldn't get a single decent match? I started introspecting about that. My main intention to utilize the Tinder was to just gain some little bit of experience about dating, talking confidently to other girls, how to have a meaningful conversation, etc. It was a useless attempt. I wasted my $15. Actually, I did not. I got a good experience about how Tinder works by exploiting the single souls from that money. Now, I decided not to think about that experience and concentrate on my work, hobbies. I would not call the experience terrible, but it was a bad experience. I joined Tinder for having some good conversations and developing good bonds. Chatted with a guy who was intelligent, funny, and well-educated. I always preferred such kinds. Negatives were, he was too secretive about his life and very rigid. So we started chatting, moved to WhatsApp, and after knowing enough about each other we decided to meet. The first meeting was good. I enjoyed his company. We met at a coffee shop, and he was more or less nice to me. He also cracked some jokes which I enjoyed. He used to tease me a lot, and I had not much problem with it, but it also led to fighting among us on a regular basis. Another problem, which was there, that he would not answer my questions. We used to talk on daily basis, and I remember asking his date of birth for 1 month, but he did not tell me. I still do not know why he hid that info from me, because that was not a big deal. Second incident happened when I was in his car and just saw his contact cards. I casually picked one of them. At that time, his reaction was, "Why are you looking at my card?" I did not take it seriously, and like another joke and petty fight, I reacted by giving the card back without seeing it and said, "I have least interest in it." He was hiding his address and contact info from me, which otherwise would be available to many of his clients. He is an advocate. After a few weeks, I kept asking for his date of birth. 'Cause I was surprised, why would he hide a simple fact, or maybe he was teasing me by making me more curious. After a few weeks, when we met, again I was in his car and his cards were there. I picked one of them, and this time I was very happy and decided to keep it with me. I had never imagined that he was so egoistic and stubborn that he forced me to return the card, even tried to snatch it from me. Initially, I thought it's just a momentary thing. I even asked him, "Can't you see me happy?" 'Cause there was actually nothing to hide. It was just his stubborn nature and ego. He told me that he won't get out of the car, we were heading to a restaurant, if I did not return the card. After arguments I decided to go back, but he had locked the car too and asked me, "Ace hi chali jaogi, you will leave without returning the card?" I was surprised at this. Then he snatched my purse. I was too angry and hurt at that locking of car and his rigid behavior. I returned the card back to him and got out of his car, and without looking back, moved towards the metro station to come back home. It was our last meeting. It ended there. I had been ignoring the things for a few months. 'Cause for me he was important. But then there was a moment when my mind told me, no, that's enough. I can't take it anymore. Cannot hurt myself more. Note, I am happy that I could get it out of my system by sharing it here. I do not have hard feelings for him, but I am hurt. I still feel bad when I think about it. Date 1. Met a nice man for drinks after chatting with him for a couple of weeks. Did not feel a connection. Got a little drunk, he dropped me home, he tried to kiss me, but I was not interested at all. Date 2. Met someone with a load of mutual friends. Again, met for a date, no sparks, went home alone. Now, I was getting bolder and choosing guys to talk only after looking at their profiles. Date 3. Met someone with similar background, met him for a drink. He mentioned he was in a long-term but long-distance relationship with a girl, but was very unhappy. Felt bad for him, continued chatting with him. Next time we met, we had sex. Did I feel guilty? Sure. But I was lonely as fuck, and we continued doing this for 2 weeks. Both realized it was wrong and stopped it forever. Now he is married to the girl, and I do not think she knows. After a couple months, started Tinder again. Date 4, matched with a guy who wanted to hook up only. I was okay with it. Went back, had awfully bad sex, though did not complain, but man, oh man, I think my face gave it away. He blocked me the next day. Huh. Meanwhile, date 1 and date 4 turned out to be best friends, and date 1 started abusing me, which was very stressful and degrading. Date 5. Now this was a guy, we had the exact same background, same tastes, same challenges. I was very cautious. I spoke to him for almost 2 months before meeting him, but when we met, sparks flew, at least for me. We went back to my place and had a very great time, but he left immediately later, saying he had work the next day, was a weekend. The next day he blocked me. This was when all hell broke loose. I felt pathetic, hurt, and so stupid. Well, I did drop him a message, sharing the same. Have always regretted being so emotional. After that, I was off Tinder for a very long time. Went back again. Date 6, met a guy, he was okay. Wanted a friends with benefits relationship. I was okay with it, since I was lonely, but the sex was really bad. Guys, a girl needs some loving too. This continued for 2 months. Date 7, at last met a guy. I had been interacting for a while, and the experience was fucking explosive. He never blocked me, met him once again. Sometimes we connect over chat, but no one bothers the other one. Date 8, met another guy, fell in love, was in a relationship for almost a year. But after 10 months or so the relationship fizzled out. Tried for a year, but well, things did not work. While the relationship had its ups and downs, it was stable and happy one for most of the time. Meanwhile, date 5 connected again, apologizing. I was not interested, but when things got tougher with the guy I was dating, I connected and vented out my frustration. After my breakup, hooked up with date 5 again. For all the good sex, he never allowed any emotional connection. Went on and off for a year too. Both traveled abroad / domestically at our own expense to see each other sometime, but always ended up being frustrated because of other priorities. More often than not, it was me traveling and getting ditched. Realized this was not helping me, and after a lot of heartache, on my part of course, decided to move on. Of course, not before, I had another one of those emotional outbursts. Regrettably, this lasted a week. This time, however, I was not blocked, felt pretty pathetic. The last one has definitely opened a Pandora's box of emotions for me, forcing me to reevaluate what the hell I want from Tinder and life. Net, Tinder was a mixed bag for me. Have spoken to interesting people, creeps, fuckboys, all kinds of guys. You just need to make sure both parties involved are looking for the same thing. For me, the number of bad experiences exceeded the good ones. My most unpleasant with Tinder experience was with a guy, and I'll exclude his name for privacy reasons. I was on Tinder in 2016 of October. Nothing in my life was going right, so what could Tinder do to ruin it or make it worse? Having an easy interaction, and maybe sex is cool, nothing else got me out of the house except work. And at the time I was smoking like a chimney, and very socially isolated. I loved my co-workers, and also disliked some. Days when I needed the good, I got the bad. Days when I couldn't handle talking to people, I got the good. My social life was limited, and it was okay to some extent. I liked Tinder on my lunch breaks because it was like talking to someone who would care to listen. Don't go grabbing tissues already. I enjoyed making small talk. Customers would rush me to make their coffee, and I get that. But I liked making connections with others. In this age, it's more difficult to make a human connection unless preceded by an internet one, it seems. So making and keeping friends is difficult. On Tinder, I could ask a stranger how he was or she was. We can talk about where I work and how I got a burrito for lunch. What kind of music we like. In relationships and friendships, there's a certain point where you stop asking each other. You feel like you know everything, or enough to keep having sex and eating pizza while not having a conversation. I like how Tinder gave me the high of what I loved about relationships, sharing and receiving information, without the commitment. Yes, I had commitment issues, but I wasn't outspoken about it. My lack of commitment and my childhood abandonment were two odds I didn't want to interfere, but evidently did at the worst times. I chatted up a guy, and he was good looking, or more so, average kind of good. We made plans to meet up, and I remember Ubering to his place, and we made nice small talk. We watched a movie I never got to see the ending of. To this day, I don't want to because of how it went after. He gave me ice cream, my favorite one, and I thought that was so dreamy. I wasn't catchy feelings, but I was more interested than not. We talked, and he kept complimenting my body, and etc., etc. I've received compliments on my body before by men, and to this day, I don't know how to react to it. It's a shame when a body can be sexy, but the brain with it was so socially awkward you can't accept the compliment. Welcome to my life. Now back to the story. This guy and I end up parting ways the same. We should do this again sometime. Him meaning the sex, me meaning the hanging out. We kissed each other before I left. It was cool. The day after, I message him, hey, and I'm pretty lighthearted. I forgot my favorite water bottle at his house. Yep, that's cliche, right? But this wasn't on purpose. I mentioned it to him and asked him to put it aside for me, and I'd be able to get it later in the week since I worked. His response? Yeah, you left your water bottle along with your dignity at the door. What the actual hell? This decent guy turned into a decent asshole. I didn't know how to react. Do I laugh it off? Is he kidding? I mean, we joked playfully before. He seemed nice. It wasn't worth the shame in this TV asshole personality. Unmatched. I met this guy on a dating site a few years ago. I was 19 at the time, and he claimed to be 23. He seemed really decent, great sense of humor, common sense, charming. We arranged to go on a date on a Saturday night in the city. First warning sign, I showed up in high heels and a bodycon bandage dress with my hair and makeup done, and he thought showing up to a date in dirty jeans and an old scabby sweater, in mustard color and covered in holes, was acceptable. In hindsight, I should have just walked away before he spotted me, but at the time I decided to give him a chance, thinking that some people just aren't fashion conscious, and he might not have had the means to get his clothes looking nice. Second warning sign, as we're walking through the city to the restaurant, he tells me he has a confession to make. Turns out, he's not 23, he's 33. I should have spotted that he didn't look 23 in person, but I guess I was kind of shocked that he turned up looking like a tramp that I just didn't notice. Once again, I should have left. In the restaurant, I'm trying to make conversation whilst we're waiting for our food. If I didn't make conversation, he wouldn't have spoken much. Instead, he was quite content to stare at me. Just staring. The few times he does speak, it's to tell me how attractive I am, and that he likes my dress, but it would look a lot better on his bedroom floor. Third warning sign. He barely eats anything of his meal. He tells me he's not hungry, as he ate a Burger King meal on the bus ride over. This is despite the fact that we'd arranged to eat before going for drinks. Fine, I tell him, but I'm still eating my food. At the end of dinner, he insists on paying. I'm not comfortable with that. I'd much rather pay for my own food and he pays for his, but when he practically shouted at me to stop arguing and let him pay, I just sat back and let him. The part of town with the good pubs and bars is a 10-minute walk, across a bridge and through the old market square. I thought that walk was never going to end. Now, I'm from Norway, but I was studying in the UK at the time, and this city was a really old medieval city with twisting paths, little narrow streets, dark alleys, rickety old buildings, and lots of shady nooks everywhere. So you can imagine how uncomfortable I was walking with him, especially since the journey waxed mostly void of other people. This guy starts getting grabby. He keeps putting his hands on me despite that I've told him to stop. He's getting way too handsy, and he's practically trying to dry hump me. I keep telling him to stop, but at the same time, I don't want to upset him since we're alone, and he's much bigger than me. Then he grabs at the front of my dress, which was strapless, and yanks it down. I was braless, so he completely exposed my breasts, which he then groped at. I poked him in the eye and ran, no easy task uphill in high heels over cobblestones. He runs after me, grabbing at me and trying to stop me, but I keep pushing him off, whacking him with my bag and hitting at him. We're getting closer to the lively part of town, and there's a few people about who clearly see me fighting this guy off, but do absolutely nothing to help or intervene. I guess people assumed we were a drunken couple having an argument. Not their business. He's still grabbing at me and trying to wrestle me to a stop at this point. I see bouncers standing outside the nearest club. I give my dodgy date another shove and run for the bouncers. I latched onto one of them and clung onto him for dear life as I told him what had happened. My date had caught up to me, was shouting his head off, calling me a bitch and a slut, and saying that I owed him. The next thing I know, the bouncer is whisking me inside. He takes me behind the bar and tells the bartender to call me a taxi, and to stay with me until I'm safely inside the taxi. She stays with me in the back room until my taxi arrives, and she smuggles me out of the back door as my date is still out front shouting his mouth off. The next day, I take a thank you card and a big box of chocolates to the bar to thank the staff for helping me. The same bartender from the night before was starting her shift when I showed up. She tells me that the guys kept shouting his head off, calling me every name under the sun, and ranting about how I owed him a fuck because he bought my dinner. He kept trying to push his way into the bar to find me, and eventually one of the bouncers got fed up with him and knocked him out cold. I went on a date with an insanely attractive girl I met on Tinder. First date was a coffee shop and quick chat. Not good but not bad. I enjoyed myself a bit, so I thought I'd give her another shot. Second date, she suggests we go grab a drink. I oblige her and take her to my favorite bar in my native Indianapolis. We both order vodka cocktails, the bar's specialty. So, I'm a slow drinker. I tend to drink maybe 1 to 2 drinks and call it a night. I've never really enjoyed the feeling of being drunk. I'm maybe a third of the way through my first drink when she's ordering her second. Later, when I finish my first and only drink, she's well into her third. 5 drinks, and close to $50 later, she's completely shit-faced and decides to ask me some very intrusive questions about my religious beliefs. Non-believer here. She then proceeds to chastise me quite loudly. Loudly enough that some of the bar staff and patrons are looking at us uncomfortably. My face had to have been as red as a baboon's ass, I'm sure. So at this point in time, I decided to politely nope my way out of such a horrid situation by saying, politely, I have to go. I'm not really having a good time now, and you're being very rude to me, so I think I'll use this opportunity to get out and count my losses. Her, well, you're an asshole anyway. You need to take me home, now. This is the part of the date where I decided to stand up for myself. Stupid me. Me, I have a better idea. How about you get an Uber driver to take you home? So I don't have to sit anywhere near your crazy ass. She throws what's left of her drink in my face and continues to yell even louder. I mouth the words check to my bartender because I was stupid enough to pay for the drinks by opening a tab with my credit card. I pay for the drinks and walk out without her. She screams at me again for walking away. We're outside and I'm making my way to my car and she's demanding that I take her home again. Mia, hello. Get an Uber. I'm not letting you anywhere near my car. She then admits to me that she can't get an Uber because she doesn't have enough money in her checking account to afford one. So on top of drunken lunatic, I'm here with a broke-ass post-college girl now. Out of desperation, I agree to pay for the Uber driver to take her home. She agrees and we spend the next few minutes in complete, total silence. The Uber driver finally rolls up and I open his rear passenger door for her to get in. She calls me the N-word in response. I'm white. She then says, I'm not riding in that Uber. I don't know this guy. He could be a serial killer or rapist or something. Me dude. Just get in the goddamn car and go. Her. No longer angry, but almost breaking down into tears. Can't you just take me home? Please, was? Uber driver looks at me like I just punched his grandma. After some coaxing, I manage to talk her into getting into the Uber. I hop in my car and drive home, shaking with anger/self-pity/anxiety. Uber driver gives me a 1-star rating. I give him a $20 tip as a, I'm sorry for pawning this psycho on you tax. He re-ranks me as a 5-star. The next day, this girl texts me and apologizes for acting that way. She's had blah 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 happening in her life, and she gets angry when she drinks too much. I accepted her apology. She asks if we could hang out again soon. I sent her the most polite, absolutely fucking not, I could muster. She then started ridiculing me via text until I blocked her number. Met a guy on a dating app. He seemed nice enough, a shy metalhead, a nerd, so just my thing. After some days of texting, we decided to meet up. I told him I needed to go shopping because I wanted a new outfit for my birthday, and he said he would be happy to go with me because he knows some cool stores. I was a metalhead too at the time, but quite inexperienced, so I thought this would be a good idea. I meet him, and he is at least twice the size that his profile pictures showed. I tried not to be judgmental, and still give him a chance. We walk Trough Town, talk a bit, he seems kind of nice, it's okay. I buy some clothing, all is well. He asks if he might join me, and my friends at the bar where I will celebrate. Which is odd, because it's a birthday party and I've only known him for a week, but I say that he can stop by if he wants, because there are enough people that it's not that much of a big deal. And I know nearly everyone there, so even if he gets creepy, all is safe. In the last shop, he suddenly tells me that he needs to buy me something for my birthday. I say that that is not necessary since we only know each other for a week or so, but he insists. I say I want a bracelet or something like that, because that's something that is not too expensive. He tells me he will get one for me, but he wants to choose because it is his gift to me. And then he gets me this necklace thing with a ring on the front. You know, this kind of thing that shows off that you are the submissive part in a BDSM relationship. He buys it, gives it to me, and tells me that I should wear it at my birthday party. I tell him why this is inappropriate. I'm not going to walk around showing off some kinks in a bar. I know everyone, and the bartenders are like my fathers to me. He tells me that this is obviously not a real thing because it doesn't need a key to open. It's just for fun, and you will look stunning in it. Well, with that, I already feel awkward enough to end the date and tell him that I want to go home. He asks me if I want to stay a bit longer and grab a coffee or something like that. I say no, I really want to go, it's getting late. After some more tries from him to get me to spend more time with him, I get free of him. So fast forward to my birthday. I hoped he won't show up, but he did. Tells me he is really sad that I didn't wear his necklace. Anyway, I have a good time talking with my friends, and my male best friend at the time starts a long conversation with that guy about some board game. I don't remember which it was. So I thought everything was fine and I talked to my other friends. Suddenly, the guy leaves. I'm pretty drunk by then, and don't really give it a second thought. An hour later I looked at my phone. There was a text on it saying, "I'm waiting outside. If you care about me, come out," from directly after he left. Thought he would be gone by now, and I wanted to go out to get some fresh air, so I went. He still stood there. After an hour. I'm really uncomfortable by now. He starts crying and telling me how his GF of 4 years cheated on him with his best friend, that he was suicidal, and that he really liked me, and it hurt so bad that I didn't spend time with him on my birthday, when 15 friends of mine were around which I've all known for years. I tell him that I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm able to give him what he wants. He says he will go home now, but I could come for Breakfast tomorrow. I tell him I don't want to. He tries to insist. He wants to make up for the drama he caused today. Said no again, walked back in, never heard of him again. This guy was completely creepy at the time. I mean, he was just a heartbroken guy with zero social skills. But still, this was for too creepy and cringeworthy for me. Back when I was about 20 years old, I decided to try my hand at online dating. This was at a time when the idea of meeting people over the internet was less commonplace than it is now. But I did manage to connect with a young woman who seemed, at first glance, like she might be a nice companion. She was tall and slender. She came across as being both fiercely intelligent and incredibly witty, and she wrote in a way that implied an appreciation for directness and rationality. She also had impeccable spelling and grammar, for which I have a somewhat unhealthy fondness. Even our interests were similar. Needless to say, I was practically smitten. The two of us exchanged about a dozen letters before deciding to meet in person, and when it came time for our date, I was feeling more than a little bit excited. If I'd known what would happen, though, I would have asked for the check with my meal. See, at first, we rehashed things that we'd already discussed, and that quickly gave way to new topics, one of which was childhood experiences, which is when things started to go off the rails. I can remember, she told me, going to McDonald's as a kid and ordering a Happy Meal just for the toy. Me too, I replied with a bit of embarrassment. Fortunately, I grew out of that compulsion. My date nodded her agreement. Yeah, I wouldn't even finish the meal. I'd take maybe 3 bites of the burger, leave the fries untouched, and then tell my mother that I was full. I never had a problem finishing my food, I answered. It wasn't the most interesting of conversations, but I was having a good time. Well, I grew out of it, said my date. I went through basic training when I was 18, and they forced me to always finish my meals. Now I can eat an entire Big Mac without stopping. Her eyes brightened, and she leaned forward. What's your favorite McDonald's burger? She asked. Now, I like a good burger. Hell, I love a good burger. A bacon cheeseburger with fresh, crisp onions and firm tomato slices might be my favorite meal. But as far as I'm concerned, McDonald's does not serve burgers. McDonald's sells copious amounts of salt and sugar that have been molded to look vaguely like a meat-based sandwich. I don't really eat at McDonald's, I said, but I do like... You don't eat at McDonald's? The urgency and the shock in my date's voice caught me off guard. No, not really, I said again. Not if I have a choice in the matter. This, for some reason, was the wrong thing to say. From that moment on, I was treated to nothing but averted eyes and monosyllabic responses. Each time that I tried to start the conversation back up, I found myself faced with a glare that would have made Medusa jealous. Even my attempts at finding out why McDonald's was so important to the girl were entirely fruitless, and by the end of the afternoon, I was worried that I'd somehow claimed to be a Nazi. The two of us parted ways immediately after the meal was over, without her so much as saying goodbye. I never heard from the young woman after that. The one email I sent, in which I apologized for offending her, but expressed my bewilderment as to how I'd done it, received no response. I've had people suggest that she was a stealth marketer of some sort, but that just doesn't seem right. Even so, sometimes I do still think of her when I hear that stupid jingle. I picked her up from her job at the airport. First clue should have been that she didn't really match her pictures. Not so much that it was catfishing, but she was a lot bigger than her photos suggested. She had also been pretty forward when we were texting, which I thought was great, but seems to have been misleading. It's important later. We went to this arcade place. The evening was fun, but I got that gut feeling that everything's not quite right with her. I figure I might be overthinking it and carry on. Later we went to a park nearby. It's pretty sizable, and we're looking for stuff to do, so she suggests we go for a walk, and I say sure. She's pretty out of shape, so we made it halfway up the hill before she had to take a break. It's at this exact moment that everything went sideways. She said she wanted to suck my dick. Right there. Halfway up a hill when it's 5C. In broad daylight. In sight of the parking lot. And also the busy road. Yeah, she'd been pretty forward before, but I think this might be taking it a bit too far. My brain kinda shut off at this point. I think the conflict between wanting head and not wanting people to see us just kinda short-circuited everything. I just kept repeating that people could see us. We head back down and get in the car. She asks what else we want to do. At this point, I just wanted the date to end and tell her I have to get up in the morning and want to go home. She's figured out that I'm not interested in another date. Cue the most uncomfortable 10-minute drive of my life. She keeps asking what she did wrong, where the evening went wrong, why I'm not interested when things were going so well earlier. I try my absolute best not to give any straight answers. I'm not really a confrontational person, and I just want the ride to be over. She switches to saying I'm not a real man, how I'm passing up something great, how she's such a wonderful person if I just got that chance to know her, how she's the mature one here. She also asks if it was because of her accent. She was an Indian immigrant who'd lived here for a few years. I barely noticed the accent, or her weight. She came back to this a few times. Get back to her work and she gives me another lecture on how great she is, and then makes me delete all her contact info, which I'm more than happy to do, and then says that it hurt that I did that and she needs closure. It's been 10 whole minutes. I think closure takes a little longer than that. She texts me 5 minutes later with a giant all-caps paragraph. I mainly skimmed it, but the general theme was how much of an asshole I am, how I promised tonight would go great. I was trying to reassure her before the date when she said she was nervous. Lesson learned: don't make promises you can't keep, and that I must be gay to pass up a blowjob. 3 days later she calls me. I pick up the phone. It said no caller ID, so I figured there's a chance it could be someone else. And she asks if it's weird that she misses me. I hang up. Yes, it's weird. It's a first date. She tries calling again, and again after that. Haven't heard anything since, thank God.